Hello, this is Kris Nelson from evolvedconsciousness.org. I'll be reading another etymological article. This is the last one I did in a big series relating to reality and words as they reflect reality. So we have words, relations, and proportions, published on the 12th of December, 2014. If man has the capacity to be the most rational animal, even if we are not always the most rational animal, we can determine if it is accurate to say we are being rational by examining the word rational and what it means. Rationality deals with previous topics of existence, consciousness, knowledge, memory, etc. So I have other etymological breakdowns on knowledge, memory, and reality, on axioms, existence, consciousness, and identity, as well as there's another one on analogy, balance, and in between. There's a bunch of etymological articles that you can find in the main work section on my page, and you can just scroll for etymology, and you'll see the ones that deal with etymology, and they all have an audio or video. So rational is pertaining to reason, from ratio, which is reckoning, calculation, and reason. Ratio is reckoning, numbering, calculation, procedure, judgment, understanding, from the stem of rere, to reckon, calculate, also think. So you see it's related. Rational, ratio. Rational comes from ratio. Ratio has to do with judgment, understanding, procedure, number, reckon, calculate. So just first of all, judgment, a ratio. When you're looking at a ratio between things, well, you have to one thing compared to another. That's why I called the article Words, Reality, and Proportions rather than ratio, because that's what proportions are, is a ratio. And the only way to determine a proportion, to determine a ratio, is to judge. And that provides you with the understanding. That's a reckoning and a calculation, to think. That's what judging is. You can find more on judgment and discernment for understanding is described in the dualistic conceptual framework, and also the article on judgments and the New Age confusion about how judgments are allegedly a bad thing. The only thing bad about judgments is a bad judgment. That's all. So just make good judgments and there's no problem with judgments. Reason. So we had rational and ratio, but they're related to reason. So what is reason? The intellectual faculty that adopts actions to ends. That's one interpretation, but also statement in agreement, statement of explanation or justification. So you can have the reason you do things, it's why we intellectualize our actions, we do something for a specific end, and also the reason, justification and excuses, not really a reason, but the same thing, why we do things, why we act. So it's course, matter, subject, language, speech, thought, opinion. And again, it's from ratio. So reason comes from ratio, reckoning, understanding, motive, cause. From the Proto-Indo-European root re or rei, re, whatever, to reason and count. So the way we arrive at an understanding of something in order to drive us and do something, well, we have to reason about it, we have to think about it, and we use rational mind and reasoning, and that's through ratio, through looking at things and comparing them and judging them, and then we choose a choice, because there's many choices in life, there's almost an infinite variability, but we choose one amongst the many every time we do something. You can only do one thing at a time. Every time it's a choice. Every time it's a comparison with other choices and choosing to do something. So that's why in the Proto-Indo-European re, it's related to count. Because you have to count things in reality in order to compare them and relate them. And this relates to logic, logos, and leg, the root leg, which is to collect, and you have seer, see, from science and consciousness and all that, and it relates to know through a division and a cutting and a splitting. So I've done other etymological articles tracing reality and the axioms existence and analogy and balance and knowledge and reality. They're all related into how we understand reality, because the words and the symbols of our language reflect our understanding of reality. So that's how we get a better understanding of reality, is through the words that reflect them. Or else we could invent any word we want and have it apply to any part of reality or any imagined part of reality. So when you look at etymology, you're going to get grounded in reality more. Think is from the Proto-Indo-European tong, which is to think or feel, which is also the root of thought and thank. So we have from the Old English, penkin, imagine, conceive in the mind, consider, meditate, remember, and intend, wish, desire. It's anything that comes from our consciousness. That's why it's think and feel. As I've explained in the Trinity of Consciousness, you cannot have emotions without thought and meaning to attribute an emotion, and then it produces a physiological feeling in your body. So everything relates to that prime essence, generative force of thought, and then you have generative emotions, and then generative care that leads to the generation of will and the generation of action. We are generators. We are causal generators. And if you look at correspondences of words, the internal aspect of consciousness is the causal force of consciousness versus the effect we produce with our actions, and the causal internal, well, that's the quote spiritual, because it's unseen, immaterial, non-physical, and that is quote spirit, and that's quote God. So we are the quote God, because it's all, we are the causal generators, right? That's how we view God, as a causal generator. That's how we can also view how we've anthropomorphized, projected, and personified ourselves onto other conceptions, and that's how you lead to God personalities and in the ancient lore, in order to symbolize and represent aspects of ourselves. This is what was done in Egypt. This is what's done in the Bible. It's all personifications to illustrate aspects of ourselves and personalities and understandings of reality and ourselves and psychology and consciousness. So I've previously talked about thought and emotion in left and right mind, heart, deceptions, and previously in consciousness and the brain, with relating to the Trinity of Consciousness and how it's a feedback between thought and emotion, and cerebral consciousness and the cerebral hemispheres, consciousness and the brain, consciousness and polarity, as well as meditation, which is why you have imagine, conceive in the mind, consider, meditate, remember, intend, wish, desire, because this is, we're talking about true meditation, not the altered form from that was adopted as a conventional meaning later on in order as altered and induced altered states of consciousness. That's not real meditation. Real meditation, as I've explained in my meditation article, relates to the internal capacities of consciousness, which are quote mind and quote heart. So you can read or listen to my meditation presentation and the left and right mind and heart presentation, and the infographic and the deceptions related to those words and the metaphors, and how people do not think of meditation in the true sense, which is in the etymology, and it's related to reflection and contemplation and thought in order to understand reality. It's not related to going into inner subjective altered states of consciousness. That's not true meditation. That's what I consider altered and honestly a bastardized form. Although it has its purpose and it can provide healing, it is not the most optimal functioning purpose of the word meditation, which true meditation is about actual thinking, conscious, in-conscious awareness about reality in order to understand reality. And you can bring that capacity of true meditation into the altered, induced state of inner meditative consciousness and use it as a concentration tool. But why would you use the first most important ability within the second when you can just use the first itself? The reason you use the second one is when you have undeveloped mind and undeveloped capacities and you can't clear your mind of thoughts. So there are, and you might have emotional problems or stress and you need to calm. So there is a purpose for the second one, but it's not the primary purpose. It's an altered form of meditation. The primary true meditation is related to conscious awareness through consciousness of thought in order to evolve consciousness by understanding reality. So we have thought, the process of thinking, a thought, compassion, and I've done an analysis on compassion, sympathy, and empathy called bearing good and evil. And you have to think about, you have to be aware of, so consciously aware of reality and of the good and the evil in order to bear the evil so that we can put an end to evil. So people who don't have compassion are not thinking about reality. They're not consciously aware of reality and they have a devolved consciousness. They're not evolving consciousness. They have deadened heart centers, deadened care, deadened compassion, deadened empathy, deadened conscience, and deadened morality as a result. And thought is from the Old English stem of penkin, to conceive of in the mind and consider. So you can think about anything. Anything, our mind is an imagination engine as well, and it's an imagination factory. You can conceive of anything. You can induce any concept you want, any belief. And you can consider that belief. Does it make it an actual aspect of objective reality? No. It's just in the imagination workshop of the subjective multiverse reality in your mind that processes in parallel to objective reality in the universe. So your multiverse of imaginal realms and fantasies does not automatically become reality. You need to actually demonstrate it through objective reality. We have the word measure, which I've gone into in the past. And that's from Proto-Indo-European me, and that's to measure. And that's why you have the word meter. And from meter, you can get to measure, meter, mater, matter, mother, and nature. And I have an article on matter that people can read or listen to or go to YouTube and video listen, whatever. So words are really related, and the point of all my work is to get down to objective reality, which is where I'm getting more and more to, and I'm learning to detect more of the beliefs that I've more or less uncritically accepted because they quote sounded good or they seem to fit in to an overall model or framework. But now through my work in understanding language and reality, the power of symbols, the power of metaphor, how symbols were first generated and how metaphor was an early use in our understanding of ourselves in reality and relating things in correspondence, and how that got twisted and bastardized into false concepts and beliefs and just twisting everything around because they don't understand and things get taken literally. Anyways, I've talked about this in a lot of recent audios on grounding in reality and symbols, reality, knowledge, belief, and attachment, as well as all the work on the trivium and the recent etymological articles that I've done in audio. I've been talking a lot about grounding in reality and beliefs and conceptions, so I recommend going through at least the last 15 audios. You're going to get a lot of understanding on reality and how to process reality properly, and how words and symbols actually reflect reality beautifully when you look at the etymology. It is beautiful to understand language properly. Do you know why it's beautiful? Because of truth. Truth is beautiful. And when you connect and correspond and correlate words in reality through objective understandings of reality, then reality starts to make more sense and you see more of reality as it really is, rather than as you want it to be through your beliefs and fantastical conceptions and speculation. You have to start with reality and then build up from there. We're too much lost in speculative beliefs and notions and then we're trying to make sense of reality from those speculative beliefs. We need to get right back down to reality and ground ourselves in reality. That's what my focus is a lot on now, because I've realized for the past, well, since 2010, before getting into Mark Passio's material in 2011, through my own discovery of information and my knowledge quest and on the path of truth, I realized that people just believe whatever they want. So that's around the same time that I learned of the word trivium, and I learned that I was already using the trivium in some capacity through my understanding of logic that I had developed in order to form non-contradictory conceptions about reality as best as I could. But again, that's related to the data you have available and how well it integrates. So when you get into etymology and words and symbols and understand how they work and how metaphors work, it's beautiful because it brings you to the grounding of reality, and you can see reality more cohesively, more consistently, and it builds an accurate, bigger picture of things grounded in reality based on our five senses. So when you want to imagine and speculate and believe in concepts, well, is that grounded in reality and things that we can see with our five senses? No. So it's a secondary importance next to the things we can actually ground in reality. Those conceptions and beliefs and possibilities, or maybe even probabilities, are not as required as knowledge of grounding in reality through objective reality and the ostensive capacity to see things in reality as they are. When we believe in induced concepts and beliefs, that can override our ability to see objective reality. This is what I've found in what I consider pseudo-spiritual understanding of natural moral law, morality. As people are mixing in beliefs and speculations of possibilities that they induce as concepts in their mind, or other people induce into them, and they accept because they sound or feel good or resonate. And then this poisons your ability to objectively see reality as it is and look further into things as they are, because you've already accepted the concept as valid and you're not verifying it through deduction. You're not looking back into reality to see if that concept is even valid, which is what I've been doing recently with natural moral law. I've been seeing fallacies in the way this concept has been described, and I'm working to correct them. And I just published an article on natural moral law science and how it is a science, and what natural moral law really is in terms of comparison to natural law of cause and effect. Natural moral law of cause and effect is not the universal natural law of cause and effect, because morals aren't the exclusive property of natural law, cause and effect. That's why there's natural moral law, cause and effect. There's a big, big difference that people seem to be blinded to. So we have meter, from the Greek metron, which is a meter, a verse. So you can think of music, a meter and a verse. That by which anything is measured. A measure, a length, a size, a limit, a proportion. So again, here we go. We got rational from ratio, reason is from ratio, and they all have to do with thinking and thought, and that all has to do with measuring. Because what are you doing when you're comparing things? When you have a proportion and a ratio, well, you're measuring. A 1-to-1 ratio, a 1-to-2 ratio, a fraction of 1/3, whatever. It's a measurement. So a meter is measure, length, size, limit, proportion. That's why the meter is used as the standard of measurement in the non-empirical way, because you have feet and all that stuff in variable units of measure. But when you have meters and kilometers, centimeters, decameters, millimeters, well, it all goes in the powers of 10, and it's a lot easier to relate measurements in terms of meters and liters and volume. So you have meters in the distance, you have volume for space, and you have grams and kilograms for mass. and they can all be related more easily in mathematical terms and understood in relation to each other. So meter is to measure essentially, because of the root mi. It's the same root again, mi. And that's also the root for meditate, as I've gone into the etymology for meditate, so please do check out that presentation if you're at all interested. If you want to learn my judgment and my assessment of objective reality and meditation through etymology and what it's supposed to mean and how it actually is more important in a true sense rather than in the altered sense. So the cognates is Greek metra and a lot or portion. So when you have a lot of land or a portion of land, well, in the Greek that was metra because it was a measurement of land. Sanskrit mati, measures, matra, measure, and you have okay, that's enough. So we get the proportion again. We had ratio, now we have meter, and they relate to proportion. So it's a due relation of one part to another, a 1-to-1 ratio, a 1-to-2 ratio. It's always accounting one thing to another, and you compare them, you measure them, you judge them, and then you make conclusions on whatever you're trying to figure out, whatever that comparison can provide you with an understanding of. So we can compare differences and we can compare similarities. You can get more information on how that works in the dualistic conceptual framework for perceiving, conceiving, understanding, and navigating reality, and how it relates to the frequency of truth and our perceptions, and how we need to align our perception with reality. And there's a nice infographic based on Mark Passio's original infographic. Mine's more colorful and more detailed. So proportion, due relation of one part to another. Also the size, extent, or comparative relation in size, degree, and number. Again, compare. Judging. Judging is part of reality. All the New Agers who are idiots and want to say judging as a negative, well, they don't understand reality, they don't understand word symbols, they don't understand how words reflect reality, they don't understand nothing. As far as I'm concerned, they're idiots. I lived with one. Boo-hoo if you're insulted. I don't think that person will ever hear any of my audios because they're not interested in learning. They like their New Age information and their formulated beliefs and pure speculation, and they'll remain attached to that forever. Because people believe whatever they want to believe. So from pro, for proportion, is pro is for, and the ablative of partio, a division. Again, if you look at my other work on knowledge and analogy and balance, science and knowledge, it's all related to dividing or splitting or cutting and division. I went into the etymology for division and I think tracing reality, a visionary quest to wisdom. Anyways, like I said, listen to my past 10 or 15 audios. You'll gain a lot of understanding about etymology and reality. So, proportion is for division, related to pars. And we can see the word part. So the word part is a division, a portion of a whole, right? So we looked at meter and the Greek metra. Well, that was a lot or portion of land. Because it relates to measurement and proportion and ratio and comparison and judgment. So division, a portion of a whole, is what a part is. Pro part. Pro partio. For division. That's a proportion. See, division is inherently a part of reality. This is another thing the New Agers said when I said, well, the concept. Well, back then it wasn't. I was talking as if it was. I was just accepting it within the framework. So I was saying, well, you know, God divides to create reality, and then they're like, oh, well, there you go with your division again, and blah blah blah, and they were all against the concept, just the word. They didn't understand the concepts as related to objective reality and how it helps you understand reality. They have been brainwashed, mind-controlled, and conditioned with New Age bullshit, pseudo-spiritual bullshit, beliefs, and fantasy. The word judgment was bad. The word division was bad. It's because they've been conditioned into bullshit. So we have the old French part, to share and portion, character, power, dominion, side, way, path, Oh, I've also went into part. So as character there, you can look into a recent etymological breakdown that I turned into 3 hours and 20 minutes in an audio, because it was the article I did had really a lot of information that I elaborated upon. So character there and our character. Part I've already done in another etymological breakdown, and you can look at division of the whole, character, power, dominion, side, way, path. I forget which article it is, but if you search on my site for dominion or power or character or part, eventually you'll find the article. I just can't remember. I've done too many etymological breakdowns, and they interrelate. They're all related. If you're going to go for one etymological breakdown, you might as well listen to all of my etymological breakdowns, because everything relates. It's all foundational aspects of understanding reality and how our word symbols are correlated and correspond, and they can metaphorically be melded together in order to provide us with a deeper, cohesive understanding of the bigger picture of objective reality. Because that is where word symbols come from, objective reality. First is reality, second is knowledge of reality, and third is symbols and words and language of reality. And that's how I started off my recent article on symbols, reality, knowledge, belief, and attachment. So, related portio, in part, is a share portion, and it's from the Proto-Indo-European root pere, or pere, P-E-R-E. That's to assign, grant, allot. And that is reciprocally to get in return. And the cognates are preprote, it has been granted, and in Sanskrit, pertam, a reward. And as I said before, I've gone in, I think it was analogy and balance. It would make sense that part would be in there as a reciprocal thing for analogy, because that's how ratios work, that's how proportions work, it's reciprocal. That's why cause and effect is reciprocal, because it's a one-to-one, and they feed back on each other. That's how reality works. Everything's cause and effect, generations into the future, everything's causally related in some way. 6 degrees of separation or 20 degrees of separation, but it's all connected through cause and effect. That's the underlying foundation of reality. That's why the prime ratio 1-to-1 and cause and effect related to the prime ratio of 1-to-1. It's a basic aspect of reality. Yeah, so I have it here at the bottom. I think that's why I have it here. Similar to correspond and correlate, which is an analogy, balance, and in between, as well as bringing something back in the bearing good and evil article. Right. In terms of reciprocal, because the balance is a reciprocity, and analogy is a reciprocity, and when you bear and bring something back that was sent to you, that's reciprocity, and that's at the core of cause and effect, and how morality works in terms of immorality in order to set things right in many cases. You can always apply law of mercy and forgiveness and things, but truly, objectively, it works in a reciprocal mode. You want to slap me? Well, I can slap you back. That is a law. I can do that. You hit me, well, then you can get back what you sent out. That's reciprocity. It corresponds and correlates, and I'm bringing it back to you, you bastard. So if you want to slap me, I can slap you back. You want to kill? Not kill. You want to murder someone? Well, then you can be killed in retaliation. That's how it works. Morality is a science. It's just because it involves volition and will, it doesn't work the same way all the time. There are different conditions that apply different variables, as well as the most important variable, which is free will. And free will alter the way reactions occur. So you have cause and effect from one causal agent, and that affects another causal agent, and the way that the second causal agent reacts to the first stimulus, the first effect from the first cause, them as a secondary cause, well, they can react differently because they have will of their own, just as the first person who generated an effect has their own will. So we have thought and logos, as previously discussed. Is logos simply speech? No, it is speech with reason. Why is the word logos rooted in logic? Logos is directly related with a specific form of speech, the speech of truth as expressed by the law of logic, i.e., the ability to reason. Non-contradiction is the law of logic. So reason does not impress upon us falsity, but truth instead, the truth from non-contradictory thinking. Contradictory false premises or propositions would not be considered reason. Hence, reason is about truth, and so is logos, about reasoning to use logic to express speech of truth, not falsity and lies, deceptions, manipulations, etc. That's why you have the Word of God, the logos, right? Well, that's all has to do with truth. That's why, quote, God, the conception of God is truth, and God is, I don't know, a bunch of other things you can write, because it all has to do with logos and speech and reason and truth, because that's what, conceptually God is. It's the one thing. It's non-contradictory. If you're one thing, you're not contradictory, and God is truth, and that's non-contradictory. So conceptually, that's how it fits together in terms of, if you look at it into the biblical aspect of the logos and the word, and how logos is logic, and logos is dialect, and logos is the root of dialogue and dialect. It has to do with speech, because again, well, logos the word and speech, see how they all relate? It's all founded from objective understanding of reality, even when you conceptualize the prime mover, the first mover, the ultimate cause of, quote, God, or the singularity, or whatever you want to call it. So again, I'll say that is a belief I have. I can't prove, the singularity, the source energy field, or whatever we can see it. We can understand aspects of it through the quantum mechanics and the quantum field and all the other fields, and the implicate order versus the explicate order of the four dimensions of matter, space and time. Things at the quantum level don't work at the same way, and the field level doesn't work at the same way. It's like a different reality. So I said, I previously discussed thought and logos, as I just mentioned. That comes from my, I think it's meditation. Let's see. Yeah, so that's from the meditation article, an etymological breakdown on what true meditation is. We have proportions and ratio with analogy and correspondence as well. So I'll quote from there. When we make an analogy, we make a comparison between two things and determine a relative proportionality, a ratio of similarity and difference that can be imprinted as a pattern. This pattern of correspondence of analogy can be seen in other things as they are compared to each other. Sometimes this evidence points to unseen laws, and some of them can even be detected through technological measurements. So you have the different forces at play, and you can measure one thing to another, and then you can see that there's a difference, and then you detect an unseen law in operation, etc. Also, etymology is, from the Greek etymologia, analysis of a word to find its true origin, and properly the study of a true sense of a word. From logia, again logia, logos, logic, the study of speaking, the study of, or a speaking of, and then that's with etymon, and the true sense. So it's the study of, or the speaking of, the true sense. That's what etymon, logia means. And again we have logia, and it's reference to also the word. So etymology, because we have logi, study. When you have psychology, anything with logi, well, it also means the study of. So again, logos, the study of. The study of is brought by learning and reasoning and thinking and logic and non-contradiction. So logos is at the root of a lot of words. And we use dialogue and dialect in order to come to an understanding with the help of other people. And we have self-dialogue, and we talk to ourselves, which is the most important in order to understand reality in ourselves. And so logia, the study of, but logia, logos, word, is also what we're talking about. Where the the study of the true sense. So it's etymologia logia, or logia etymon logia, because we're talking about the study of the true sense of words. So the logia part is like twice. So and etymos from etymon, the true sense. So etymos is the true, real, actual, related to eteos, and that means true. So that was a bunch of etymology. That was a bunch of words. So I put them all at the beginning. I guess there's not that much compared to other articles I've done, but it seems my my breakdown and my explanation based on these words is a lot longer. So here we go. If we look at logia, logos, not as the study of, but as the other words it means, such as ratio, because again, ratio comes from, is related to logos. If you look at the word logic, you'll also have a reference to ratio, because that's how we come to know ratio, and it's a prime part of logic is by comparing things, which is how we understand reality. We use logic to compare, contrast ratios, proportions, and we judge things, and that's how we come to understand things. So that's why ratio is related to logic and logos as well. And we can see that etymology is the true, real, and actual in relationships to form a study in relation, proportion, one thing to another, as all words relate, and the parts of reality relate. So we see again relationships, and that is proportion and ratio. Well, it's a relationship between one thing and another. An analogy, a balance, uses relationships, ratio, and proportions from part to part. So that's why in deductive logic, from the induction is using parts and parts and trying to find a whole, which I have an infographic to explain that a bit below. But you also have, in deductive logic, you're going back down from the whole that you think exists, and you're verifying it in every part that it applies to, and it's important to do that. If it doesn't apply, all the parts that are applicable, if one of them fails, then your concept has a problem. I'm not saying every aspect of reality has to apply to a certain concept. That's not how it works. But every part that is supposed to apply to that concept needs to apply. You need to verify that in deduction. All of the diversity, multiplicity, and variability creates comparison and correspondence in similarity and distinction to provide definition and identity. Symbols, such as words, are formed to represent reality, and these words also correspond to each other and are understood with reference to each other. And I have a link to the recent audio I just did today for this one on senses for input of reality, not technology. There was always a relation of one part to another, either in reality or in language to represent reality. Logic is how we discover and verify the definition and identity of substances in our reality. This is proportion, ratio, and measurement. This is another way of looking at -logi for etymo, the true, real, actual, plus logi. Logos, from the Proto-Indo-European root leg, to collect, is connected to ratio through reason, from the Proto-Indo-European root rei, to reason and count. Because again, you're going to collect things. Well, how do you count? Well, you need to collect things. That's why logic is a foundation of reality, and it deals with things, with science and knowledge, because again, and analogy and balance, there's the relation of the root words of division and splitting and cutting. It's all at the root, because everything is in multiplicity, variability, and diversity in the universe, turned into one. That's what the word universe means. So in order to reason through a counting of things and the proportion and ratio, we need to collect. And that's what the logos, the leg, the Proto-Indo-European root leg means, is to collect. We see again some links in lecture, a way we study, right? Lecture, there's both lecture when you read, again, logos and the word, And we have lecture when you give information, so you speak. You have a dialogue, dialect, lecture, log, logos, leg. It's all the same thing, the same roots. So as a way we study, a logi, right? It's a study. So when you lecture, you study, and when you give a lecture, it's a study. You give a study. See how they all relate? Which is based in leg as well, since we gather and collect when we read or hear a lecture. So read, R-E-A, and then D, again, R-E-A, reason. Read is related to reason, as can be seen even visually, but if you go look at the etymology, you'll see how they are related. They have the same root in R-E-I, because again, it's to think, and what is it up here? Reason. Oh, reason and count. So yeah, it all has to do with counting and collecting. So reading is collecting words, and counting, well, you're not literally counting, but it's a counting of words, of several words. It's a counting, and you reason, and you think, and that's part of reading. My point is, etymology relates words to find their true meaning, which is what we can do with reality ourselves, and this is how words were created in the first place, to represent and communicate about certain things. The true meaning of words can be found in the roots that are the original reflection of reality that developed into other words. And sometimes these later words get altered themselves to mean something else and change how we view reality. And you can see that in the words of occult and anarchy, and as far as I'm concerned, in the word meditation. It's been changed to alter our ability to process reality, where meditation as the altered inner state is favored over the true meditation of contemplation, reflection, introspection, in actual thought, in actual discernment of reality through conscious awareness and consciousness, and not induced inner states of consciousness. So the recent works on axiom existence, consciousness, and identity, and tracing reality, the visionary quest of wisdom, shows the common root that knowledge and vision of reality has with proportions of reality, and hence degrees of separation with all aspects of reality. This common root that knowledge and vision, this common root is that of division and separation in the multiplicity, diversity, and variability that exists in the universe, where we view all the parts as turned or combined into one. See how it all relates? How beautiful language is? How it all relates to reality and the grounding in objective reality? Universe, turned or rolled into one. Well, that's the parts, all turned and rolled into one. Those are all the parts, the multiplicity, diversity, and variability. The division and separation, well, that makes up the one universe. All the parts make up the whole. The 2012 Trivium Guide by Tony Myers, page 56. I should say edited by Tony Myers in page 56, described objective and subjective reality as the objective universe and a subjective multiverse. This was a very interesting analogy to develop upon. Existence is the object of reality, that which is observed. Objective reality, the territory. That's what existence is, it's the territory. Consciousness is the subject of reality, that which is observing, and a subjective reality of trying to map out the territory is created. So when you're trying to map out the territory, you're creating a subjective reality in the multiverse of your mind that's parallel, that's processing parallel to the objective reality of the universe. And consciousness is the subject of reality. Reality is not the subject of the universe. Reality does not come from consciousness. Consciousness comes from reality. That's why my understanding now is more in grounding in reality, and how metaphors have altered our beliefs, and how we believe speculative beliefs and conceptions they don't have any real proof, but it's a possibility. I don't deny the possibility that, say, consciousness comes from God, and God breathes into our nostrils in the clay, and as a metaphor like that, so our consciousness comes from there. Well, I view it more now as I understand how quantum physics works and how everything works, and through my understanding of, I already knew programming, and I've used Legos a lot in my life, and they're the best kind of tool to develop a spatial understanding. How parts create bigger parts and bigger complexity, which is what I've been getting into and explaining in my recent audios, and how consciousness is an emergent phenomenon of the greater complexity from non-existence of just the fields to the subatomic particles to atoms, and then greater molecular constructs and matter, and then you have biology, and then you have organic matter of animals, and then we have consciousness develop, and then from that consciousness, well, then there's a recognition of reality and a processing and interacting in reality, but without the consciousness comes from the complexity of the organic forms to have consciousness. Without the body, without the matter, well, there would be no consciousness to be expressed in. So which is why that is a more grounded understanding of where consciousness comes from, because it's actually observable through objective reality. Because if you don't have a body and you don't have a brain, well, you're not going to have a consciousness. Period. End of line. That's the end of it. How are you going to have consciousness if you're not able to have the matter that can have consciousness emerge from it? You're not going to have it. So clearly, consciousness is related to matter, and consciousness is related to, well, for us, the brain. I'm pretty sure all animals have brains. They all have some form of blood and some form of anatomical structure that relates to ours, even though it's not as complex, which is why there's lower order animal life forms and there's higher order animal life forms. There's 6 general kingdoms of life, and animal is the last one, the 6th one. It's the most complex, and it has consciousness and free will. The higher order complexity, the more consciousness expressive capacities can be provided, and the more free will is expressed as well through the creative ability, through that capacity to express consciousness. And then you have humans with the greatest ability to express consciousness, with the highest order consciousness and the greatest amount of free will to create in reality and alter reality, versus the lower order consciousness animals that don't have as much free will and as much creative capacity and as much expressive capacities of consciousness. So again, get back down to grounding things in reality. I don't deny possibilities, but when I look at speculative beliefs and possibilities versus objective grounding in reality, well, I have to stick with grounding in reality. I'm getting away from pure speculative beliefs. So I'll just read a little note that I wrote yesterday. I am taking the journey to ground my understanding in actual reality, not the fantasy of believing whatever I want. That's what I want to get away from. That's what many people have problems with. We need to delineate between objective verifiables and speculative belief and possibilities. There needs to be a delineation, a clear-cut understanding. You need to have different compartments in your mind. That's what I do. You have concepts for what's possible and what's probable, and then you have what's actually verifiable in objective reality. And people get mixed up, and they take their possible and they put it into the actual. They take their probable and they put it into the actual, and that's why they don't understand reality. It's because they're mixing up the different categories of conceptual understanding based in objective reality. It's not actual, it's possible. It's not actual, it's probable. But you're making it actual, but it's just a concept, it's a speculation, it's an imagination, and you can't prove it. So yeah, it might be possible, but don't make it actual. You need to delineate. So this is what I recognize as the problem we are in. Everyone just believes whatever they want. They are not concerned with objective reality, only with what they want to be true, their dream, their imagined desire, and they seek that over seeking to know and understand reality through reality itself. They want to pretend they can understand reality through the unreality of their imagination and make that into a reality. The imaginal realm of ideas can lead to understanding reality through the refinement and continual discovery of reality itself. Ideas lead to action through creation of new things. Projecting the desires, wishes, and dream of the imaginal realm onto reality does not make it reality. Taking your subjective multiverse reality that processes in parallel to reality, but you're going to break that parallel processing and you're going to imagine something else as a possibility, and then you're going to project that possibility onto reality. You're going to take that unreality and then impose it on reality as an actuality. Well, then you're mind fucking yourself. Sorry to be blunt, but that's what it is. You're mind controlling yourself. You're casting a spell on your own mind through your own volition because you have an attachment to this idea and you want it to be true. That's what I'm talking about. You're projecting your desires, wishes, and dreams of the imaginal realm onto reality. That does not make it a reality. You're just trying to make it a reality. That's why people need to get grounded in reality, in objective reality. Very, very important. That's the ground up. We need to start from the ground up. Right now, people don't understand how to even get to understanding the ground of objective reality. And they're mixing things up. You can look at a thing in terms of belief that you will never be able to demonstrate because it is belief with no objective veracity in reality. It's all subjective. Or you can look at things in symbolism and metaphor, allegory, analogy, and parable to convey understanding that reflects reality and our capacity to evolve consciousness and live right. So what I'm talking about is all the historical stories and the narratives and then the gods, and that's all anthropomorphization, personification, and projection of ourselves and reality through symbols in order to understand ourselves and convey understanding of ourselves to other people through symbols. But people take it literally because, again, they're taking what they want to be true from their imaginations that they get from these symbols and narratives and stories, and then they're going to make it reality. They're going to make it the actual. They're taking it literally rather than understanding it as a symbolic allegory and metaphor and analogy and parable. They take it as a literal thing, and they take the unreality of the symbolic metaphor and apply it as a reality. They don't understand the metaphorical understanding, the true understanding of the metaphor and symbol, how it reflects reality, but it's not a literal reality. That's the gods and the animal gods. They're not literal things in reality. It's a metaphor, an analogy to understand reality through reference of symbols. That's why symbols are created. It's a reference to reality. Now you can have symbols that directly reference reality, as I do in my etymological work. This symbol means this in reality. And then you can have the more basic symbols which were created before these abstract symbols of lines and curvy lines that we have in our current language. Before all that was pictograph and hieroglyphics and symbols of pictures. That's what started it all. And that has, a picture has 1,000 words. So it's much more open, it's much more interpretive, and it's much more imagery and creative, and it can allow you to see things more connected. But it can also lead you to falsely interpret and falsely associate and falsely correspond, and then believe things that aren't real, and then you're going to take them as literal and believe that they are an actual. So I don't deny possibilities. I have different compartments in my mind or consciousness for different concepts. Possible, probable, and actual. I've gone into this months ago in my infographic on reality versus perception. I did this in June, I think, June or July. It's been a half a year. And I've recently done an article with that infographic as well as others on perceiving reality. People still don't understand this, still don't understand how to differentiate concepts and beliefs from actual things in reality and differentiate possibility, probability, and actuality. I do not accept beliefs as actual, for they are imaginations that can or cannot be actual, and remaining as possibilities or probable possibilities, such as the prime mover, prime cause, ultimate cause, quote God, quote whatever you want to call it, quote source, quote spirit, etc., etc. It's a possibility or a probable possibility, but I don't have any actuality of it. I don't have any way to verify it in objective reality. So why would I think it's an actuality? You're confusing conceptual frameworks and models and the different categories of understanding things as they are versus as they might be, because you cannot prove it. Might it be true? Yeah, just like I said in another audio about Democritus. Democritus, or whatever his name was, who posited the atom, because he was going causally in relation into smaller parts. Well, there has to be a source for this, a cause for this. This object here, well, there's a causal source, and there's a causal source, and there's a causal source. So he went back to, and he conceived of this thing. For him, it was indivisible, so he was wrong there, but he was right about other things. But again, it was a conception. He didn't have proof. It wasn't an actuality of reality to say that, well, at below matter, there's the atom, and that's the most indivisible unit. So there was his claim. Was it true? No. It was a possibility, but not an actuality. And even when we verify it, we can even see that it's not an actuality. It was only partially right as an actuality. So as a whole, it was a possibility because you couldn't verify it, and it had some parts of actuality that eventually did become verified. This is what people don't understand about how to discover reality grounded in objective understandings of reality that we can ostensibly detect and see. It's okay to say, I don't know. I don't know if God exists. I don't know if the source exists. I don't know if the prime mover, prime cause, if that's the ultimate thing. It's conceptual. It's what we can logically deduce, or it's an induction deduction, because you're trying to envision a universal, but you're going backwards through tracing causal steps from grammar to logic of induction and deduction, from parts to universals. Well, you're going from the part to the universal, but then you're going back down through the part to other parts, to other parts, to other parts, to other parts, to smaller and smaller, smaller parts, and then back down to a source, causal force. So it's not purely deduction, because you're deducing to induce. So it's a confusing way to look at it, but I always try to be more specific. But anyways, I'll just drop it there because it might be confusing to understand what I mean. So to continue with the article, the concept of the unit or unity of our self, the internal reality and identity, is reflected in the unity of the world, external reality and identity. Because we are a reflection of the world, and the world is a reflection of us. If you look at my causality consciousness choice and trivium chart, you'll see that reality affects us. What other people put and whatever exists in reality has an influence that affects us. Then we take that effect and we generate a cause from it. We act as a causal capacity to generate an effect from it, and we output into reality, and that affects reality. That in turn will affect us and affect other people. And that's how cause and effect is universal, and it's everywhere in nth degrees of separation. But its cause and effect is as a foundational basis. So the unity is formed from units, diverse components that are arranged and combined to form something unique but similar to others. So that's how all the matter gets constructed. That's how Legos get formed. That's how programming is formed. That's how the universe is formed. Some things might be similar, but since the law of identity applies in the variability, diversity, and multiplicity of things that exist in various arrangement and coordination of component parts, well, since each component part is not the same as the other component part in another aspect of diversity, variability, and multiplicity in the universe, then everything is unique in itself, and it has its own identity in that way, even though a human is a human, so it's the same. It's identical. It's not an identity, it's identical. That's why there's two aspects to identity. And you think of the prime cause, mover, conception, whatever, God's source, energy, singularity, all one, whatever. Well, the all one is identical. When you get to universals, the top, highest, most universal of that prime cause, mover, source, cause, whatever, that's one, and it's a universal, and it's identical. It's not an identity itself. Identity comes from reality here. Identity comes from the division, multiplicity, and diversity. And you can have our 4D realm, and you can have other dimensional realms, and maybe other entities, and whatever happens other places. Honestly, I don't care. I don't live there. So people waste their time on astral projection and remote viewing and all these things that can be induced through technological stimulus on our brains as well. So the whole subjective reality aspect is interesting to look into, and how we can induce false understandings of reality because we're inducing states of consciousness that will alter the perceptibility of reality, I guess. And we create imaginal realms possible that we project as reality, even though it's not in this reality. So that's why I say I don't care about the other places. I don't care about the other entities and all this crap. Have fun with that. Go waste your time, and don't deal with the grounded reality that will create morality. Go waste your time in speculative beliefs and all these fanciful notions. That's not what I'm doing. I view that as the big problem in our world right now. People are lost in all that bullshit and speculation and belief in the subjective multiverse of the imaginal realm of their own subjective reality. This is also how the self is made. Both the physical self and the psychological ego personality identity self-image is a composite of impressions and epigenetic influences. Oh, I did put it here. Because recently I realized, there's a concept of the morphogenetic field, which can be responsible for the creation of our the form and essence of identity as humans, from the species level of universals, which is where the form, essence, definition, and identity comes from, the most basic one, at a universal level, as a universal individual. And then we have our own specific identities, our real identities, as the individuation of the universal class of species. So we have our particular individuals rather than a universal individual. So if you need more clarification, go look at my Metaphysics, Language, and Reality, Fundamentals of the Trivium Method presentation, and you'll understand more of what I'm talking about. So the epigenetics correlated with the morphogenetics for the body. Well, the epigenetics also influences the body, but the epigenetic influences of our environment is how our ego personality identity construct, the psychological framework that allows us to be an identity separate from other identities in a consciousness aspect that emerges from our bodies. There's also the physical self that is unique from every other physical self that creates an emergent consciousness from matter in our brains, and that's how we have consciousness grounded in objective reality, to understand it that way. Without the body, there is no consciousness for the body. So from there, building up from the body, we have consciousness. So you have consciousness emerging from the physical self as so consciousness emerging from the physical self, but within consciousness we also have the ego personality identity self-image that's different from everybody else. So everyone's body is different, everyone's physical self is different, and that emerges into the consciousness, and those aspects of physical self that are different, along with the influences from our environment, such as where we're born, when we're born, who raises us, what the influences are, what they reinforce and don't reinforce as positive and negative reinforcements, and society, and how reality affects us and we affect reality in turn. That's why we are a reflection of reality and society, and then we become a reflection of society, and then we just output more into society to create more of that society, because we just become robot automatons through this chameleon shape-shifting ability of epigenetic influences upon our ego personality identity self-image construct, and our construction of how we view the world, our worldview and our sense of reality, our sense of self, is an epigenetic influence. Because we're all taking impositions from around us, from reality itself that we're able to detect, and false detections from reality, falsities, as well as the truth and falsity from other people, the truth and falsity from society itself, the truth and falsity from everywhere, influences us. The right and wrong influences us. The good and evil influences us. And these are the epigenetic factors that create our psychological ego personality identity constructs within our individual physical selves. So we're all individuals because we all have individual unique physical selves, and we all have individual unique epigenetic influences from our environment and the many aspects of the environment, as I say. Parents, teachers, society, etc. Everything influences us from birth to death. Everything. And as I've mentioned in Characters in Our Character and other place and other audios on etymology and consciousness, and we are chameleon shapeshifters, and we can reshape ourselves as clay. We can reshape ourselves into whatever we want. We don't have to keep the impositions and influences from society when we grew up in our formative years. So yes, it can be hard to deprogram ourselves and decondition ourselves from those epigenetic influences that have created who we have become. But since we are like clay, where you can write characters, so please go look at that. Please go listen to that Characters in Our Character presentation. It's very informative. And that's how we can reshape ourselves. We're shapeshifter chameleons, and this is alchemy. This is how we can remake our ego personality identity constructs. We can remake ourselves. We can let go of false aspects of attachment for our ego personality identity constructs and attach to what is true instead, and recreate our ego personality identity constructs in alignment with what is right, good, and true. Now, of course, you can't change everything because, again, you have a unique physical self. So you're born with a certain vocal and a certain appearance and certain things, and certain aspects of that will always affect who your ego personality identity construct, as well as the formation of who you are when you grow up. Well, certain things are locked in, but a lot of it can be changed. Most of it can be changed. The inner self is the parallel universe, the multiverse, the parallel processor, processing in parallel to reality, able to create other realities that mirror objective reality, parallel but different realities in our mind. And we can create many of them, a multitude. The subjective psychological imaginal realm holds the power to create universes. Not literal universes, not objective reality universes, but multiverses. That's what the multiverse is, right? Many universes. Multiverse. Oh, that's what I'm getting into in the next paragraph. Sorry. I often do that, and I jump ahead of what I'm about to explain because I forgot that that's where I already explained it was in the next paragraph. So I elaborate on what I'm about to elaborate. Maybe there are other realities and such, but this is a different way to think of the universe and the multiverse. So you can think of multiverse, in the theory of multiple universes, multiple objective universes, but we're talking about it in terms of subjective reality. And when you start to think about it, it'll really make sense. So the universe is turned or combined into one, a unity from a division, diversity, multiplicity, and variability. The multiverse is turned or combined into many. So that one, all those one things in reality, all the division, diversity, multiplicity, and variability, well, we turn it into a universe in our minds and the subjective reality from the objective reality, but we can also turn it into many realities processing in parallel. We can create imaginal realms and imaginations and different concepts and contradictory concepts that only exist in different universes, and we try to match them, but then we realize they don't match, and then we try to reformulate things. So we're multiverse in our minds. It's like a multiverse. That's why these are metaphors. Remember the power of metaphor and allegory in order to understand ourselves. It's not a literal multiverse. We're talking in metaphors. That's the purpose of language, is to use symbols, which themselves are metaphorical representations of reality, in terms of the basic pictorial graphs where the picture has 1,000 words. So the metaphors. A picture is a metaphor of 1,000 words, and it relates to reality. It's a symbol. But when you get to abstract symbols, it's more restricted. So you have lines and curvy lines. M-A-N-Y, well, many, that's a restrictive symbol word that has a specific meaning. But pictorial symbols are more creative and more imaginal, and they have more possibilities of definition. So we all have subjective, secondary, conceptual, parallel, multiverse realities in our minds, the map that shifts and changes as we learn and grow. alongside the objective universe reality of the territory. This is not literally another objective reality universe existence, but a secondary reality of how we perceive and understand things to function. This secondary reality of the mind allows for illusory unrealities to manifest in reality through our actions to create them, like money, government, religion, etc. So people think up of imaginary fantasy things and then artificially create them into reality. And they bring illusions from the unreality of the multiverse subjective domain of reality in our consciousness, in our mind, and then we create them with our arms, which is the source for artificial. So we create artificial constructs. That's what everything is. Our buildings, everything's artificial. It's made from objective reality, but we create artificial things. There's two parts to artificial. There's the artificial, like buildings and constructions. Then there's actual artificial things as illusions of things that don't inherently exist in nature. So you have a building, well, it doesn't inherently exist in nature, but it's built with things that exist in nature. So it's like a Lego. It's like the universe. It's like programming. You take parts and you make a bigger whole, right? So it actually exists. It's not an actual illusion. It's made from things that exist. That's why people want to say, well, oh, the form's not really there. That's why reality's not really there, because only the parts matter, so only the quantum level matters. People don't understand how things work. They don't understand programming, which would help them. They don't understand how Legos work, which would help them. So when you were a child, you didn't play with Legos. That impeded you, as far as I'm concerned. You didn't learn programming, which is a fundamental aspect of understanding how logic works and how cause and effect works in the one-to-one ratio, because it's ones and zeros, which I'll be explaining in my natural law presentation that's coming up on that I'm still working on. It has a lot of work in it. And, I'm dealing with cause and effect as pure cause and effect, and then I'm going to relate it to cause and effect in terms of morality, since those are two different things, even though they both use cause and effect. So I have previously called this reality level 1, what is, the actual reality, and reality level 2, perception of what is, the mental, imaginal reality. We can be fooled, tricked, conned, duped, misled, manipulated, deceived, hoodwinked, bamboozled, screwed, etc. into accepting as the actual reality that is, but it is not authentic to a true way of living. Because we're just imagining it. So that's why the problem with conceptions and imagination and belief, and you're not grounding it in reality, and it's a possibility, and maybe you conceive it as a probability, but it's not an actuality. But people take this subjective realm of reality level 2 of our perceptions of what we think is from the mental imaginal realm, and then they project it onto reality. And they say, oh, that's what is. I'm 100% certain. I know this. But it is not the authentic way to a true way of living, because you're just taking your subjective reality and you're projecting it onto objective reality. It's not going to make it real. We really need to differentiate and get back grounded in reality. That's why a lot of my work is dealing with that. All of my work deals with fundamentals of understanding reality. I don't get into government. I don't get into corporations. I don't get into that stuff, because that's other people have talked about that. You know, Mark Pastor's talked about that. You have Larkin Rose on government. He doesn't understand morality deep enough, though. You have other people who talk about other aspects of the secondary constructs in reality, those artificial things that we create, those illusions, right? The artificial constructs of government, money, religion. Okay, you can talk about that, but where does that come from? Why are these things created? That's what I'm getting into. That's why I look into psychology, our perception of reality, understanding cause and effect properly, which will lead to a proper understanding of natural moral law, rather than a convoluted understanding of how cause and effect works, and we think that there's this magical force that's going to send back what we put out based on moral actions. No. We are morality. We are natural law causal agents. Us. It comes from us. We produce immoral or moral actions, and the ones who can send us back immoral or moral consequences to our actions as a reciprocity, that we do consequences in moral or immoral ways against other beings that are affected, and they can in turn affect us by reciprocating the harm we've done. And that's how we can, it's truth or consequence, be right or go wrong. And you're going to feel the repercussions of your actions. What you sent out is going to be sent back according to the free will of other causal agents who are capable of doing that, or they're going to use their free will and not do it. It's not a magical force that's going to do it to you. You're not going to reincarnate and karma is going to do it to you in another life. That's all imaginary. It's pure speculation. That's why I say it holds zero water for me. Zero. Oh, it's still a possibility. Purple flying elephants are a possibility. I can't deny things that I can't prove are not existent. And that's one thing about the foundation of logic is you can't prove a negative. You can't prove something doesn't exist. You can't prove the non-existence of God. So any speculation you want to come up with, I automatically put it into the realm of possibility. Unless it's a contradiction, a direct contradiction of things that are possible, then it's not a possibility, and it's an impossibility. But you know, most things that people conceive of, well, okay, yeah, it might be possible, but you don't know. No one really knows those things. So you got to delineate possible, probable, and actual, and in some cases, you know, impossible because it's completely contradictory. There is also the matter of what should and ought to be compared to what currently is, that is a representation of falsity and unreality manifested into reality. So this is where I get the truth level 1 and truth level 2. Truth level 1 is reality level 1 of what is an actual reality, and then truth level 2 is what we should create, because we have ideas in the ideal of our internal realm of consciousness. So the internal realm of consciousness, what is this? Oh geez, I got too many notes. Hold on a second. Alright, so you have the internal realm of consciousness, which is mind, the idea, and the ideal. So the ideal that we can envision is a better version of what we currently have. That's why we have the mind and idea, and we have imagination, because we can create things that are better. If you lack imagination, you can never change. If you don't have an ideal of what's better than what is now, then you're never going to create anything better than what is now. That's just pure logic. That's the way it works. If you're not going to imagine something better, you'll never be able to create something better and act upon it. So first you need imagination, you need the internal consciousness in the mind and the idea and the ideal. So internal consciousness, idea, and the ideal. Well, the ideal is the potential. Now, if you look at my other work in conceptual relation between matter and, quote, spirit, well, you have the actual, which is in reality level 1. And then you have the potential, which is, quote, spirit. And the potential in the ideal, well, this is what I call truth level 2. So reality level 1, the actual is truth level 1, which is the actuality of what is, truth level 1, whatever is in reality, the good and the bad. But the bad isn't what truth level 2 is. We don't want to create the bad. That's not the ideal. We don't want evil. We don't want wrong. We don't want immorality. So that's not the ideal. So we need the imagination in the ideal to envision potential, which is, quote, spirit. As I've shown in my other work on natural law boundary conditions and spectrum of living and the philosopher's stone conceptually, you know, you have the actual and the potential. And the actual is reality and the potential is, quote, spirit, because that comes from our internal consciousness in the mind, where we envision an idea and a concept, and the idea is the ideal is the potential, and that potential is, quote, spirit. So you can see the metaphor already, how you can conceive that people have misconstrued and created pseudo-spiritual conceptions based on understanding ourselves, or a failure to, because the internal realm of consciousness is unseen, immaterial, non-physical, and that's, quote, spiritual conceptually, and that's where the potential is derived from, and that's, quote, spiritual too, right? The spirit is the potential to create in the world what doesn't exist yet but can exist from the, quote, realm of spirit, which is, quote, the realm of mind, which is the internal consciousness. All those things relate. Again, we're not proving anything, quote, spiritual in some other dimension or reality, whatever. Has nothing to do with it. We're just talking about words that reflect reality, and metaphors and symbols. And then people can take this literally. And oh my God, it's a spirit world, and that's where the potential is. It actually lies in some other reality, and that's the way I was conceiving it before, because I was heavily influenced by all these conceptions and what I consider pseudo-spiritual crap, but it's still conceptual, and it can still bring you to understand symbolically and metaphorically a greater understanding of reality. So I'd say my old work still applies, the spectrum of living where I talk about the actual and the potential as the matter and spirit. You can still look at it that way, because it still applies. You just have to reinterpret it a little bit, just a little bit, not as the way I originally said it, but change things just a little bit. But the images still apply, because it comes from the spirit realm, right? The realm of internal consciousness, where the potential and the ideal is created. It all comes from us. You understand how natural law comes from us? Everything comes from us. The consciousness comes from us. It all comes from the basic creation of reality, an emergent property of the physical body that has enough complexity in order to create the ability for consciousness to manifest, which requires a brain, and as we understand it, and then through that expression, the greater complexity can produce more complexity in expressions of consciousness, and therefore more complexity in free will, and more creativity. And again, creativity. What are we talking about in creativity? Well, that comes from the imaginal realm, right? Imagination and creativity. Well, imagination and creativity, that comes from the internal consciousness, the internal realm of the quote spirit, the potential and the ideal. So internal consciousness, the imaginal realm to idea and the ideal, and that's the potential, and that's the causal realm. Because we have if you look at my consciousness and trivium and causality and choice, well, they have the internal realm of thoughts and emotions. Again, that's the quote spiritual realm, as I've even made in those infographics. I always quote it, or anyways, it's supposed to be quoted because it's the unseen, immaterial. So that's the spiritual realm. Internal consciousness, the imagination, the ideal and the potential, that's the causal realm. And we create into the realm of effects of reality as our actions through our bodies. We manifest into reality, and that's the cause. That's the effect realm of matter. So that's matter, and then spirit's inside. Matter's on the outside, spirit's on the inside. You see how it all relates to us? You see how metaphor and symbols all relate to us? You see how everything in the past, if you go looking into history, all of the metaphors, all the symbolism, all the narratives, all the story, all relate to us and reality. That's where the whole foundation is. First, reality, then knowledge of reality, then symbols and words and language of reality. That's how it works. Everything starts with objective reality. Consciousness emerges from objective reality, from those physical beings that have the complexity to manifest consciousness. You know, everything that exists as a being, a rock, a glass, whatever. So we have the beings in terms of consciousness beings, then we have just regular being. Things that just exist in reality. Truth level 1, reality level 1. But the being, the rock, can't express consciousness. It doesn't have the complexity for that, for consciousness to emerge. Then it can't produce it. There's no neurons, it doesn't produce consciousness. There's no brain, there's no consciousness, nothing. It's a rock. So, the internal causal realm, spirit, the unseen, immaterial potential, and then that creates into the reality of the external realm, the matter. So there's matter of our bodies, and then there's internal consciousness, which is spirit. So you see where I'm going with this? I hope you do. If not, stay tuned. So we have subjective reality, the multiverse, right? We have, again, matter, spirit, actual, potential, seen, unseen, physical, non-physical, material, immaterial, effect, cause, universe, multiverse, objective reality, subjective reality. Now our subjective reality, our multiverse, we're parallel processing to objective reality of the universe. We're processing in parallel. That's why we're supposed to align our perceptions and our conceptions to reality, because everything comes from reality. We're living in reality. It's just we're free will causal agents. So from the internal, quote, spiritual realm, we can create into the external material realm. And we can manifest from our causal, creative, potential, ideal, imaginal, quote, spiritual, internal consciousness. Right? If you want to look at spirit in that way of defining unseen, as a corollary, as a correspondence, as a proportion and ratio, a 1-to-1 ratio between matter and quote spirit. They're just words, it's a symbol. The only type of spiritual and spirituality that matters to me is morality. That's what it's all about. It's just we're using a term, a symbol, to reference something in comparison to something else. So matter, spirit, and as I said, all the other comparisons, objective, subjective, etc., etc., etc. So we have causal, which is internal, quote spiritual, and therefore that's quote God, because the spirit is God, right? The prime cause is God. So we're the prime cause for the effects we generate. So that's where you can have the metaphor and the symbolism gets twisted as a literal thing, and then, oh, we're God. No, we're actually, quote, God, as we are, quote, spiritual, because it's all, quote, internal and, quote, causal, because that's what internal consciousness is, where we generate from the mind and the idea, the ideal and potential, and that's the, quote, spirit. That's the causal realm, right? The causer, the creator, right? We're causers and we're creators. So we're God. We're all gods. You understand? Metaphor, symbol. It's not literal. Get it together, people. Get grounded in reality. Understand language and symbols and how powerful and beautiful it is. Once you understand, you really have a cohesive understanding of how reality is created by us. Not in terms of we create the rocks and everything as God and the source and everything, in that conception. But we generate things in reality, we create things, we alter reality. We've created this whole artificial world, and that's us who've created it. We create into reality, reality affects us. We create the society, society affects us. It's all circular. It's reciprocal. It's a loop. You understand programming, you'll understand recursive loops. That's how it works. That's how cause and effect work. Cause and effect is a reciprocal loop. Anyways, that's in my future natural law presentation. You'll understand more about how cause and effect really works. So, causal, internal, quote, spiritual, quote, God. The internal consciousness is the imaginal creative realm, the causal realm of generation. We generate from there. From the generation of the internal aspects of consciousness, we generate, and then we have what is generated. Generated on the external. From the generation internal. We have the creator internal, and then what's created external. So we're gods, right? You see how this symbolism and people take it how literally? It's hilarious. All of the story narratives are bastardized even by academics, and they think that the people who wrote these things so they think that they were literal stories that people wrote that actually thought that they were literal. Now, that might be true at a certain period of degeneration and evolution in consciousness where people took original stories from 10, 20, 30,000 years ago, maybe in Atlantis or whatever, original symbols, and then it gets produced into other civilizations. Then you end up with Egypt. Originally, the people in Egypt understood the symbolism, and they created some things, but then eventually they forget the power of symbolism, the power of metaphor, and the power of understanding how these things reflect reality, and they're not actually literal interpretations of reality through the symbols and narrative and story. But then people forget that and it becomes literal. And then they actually believe the stories and narratives that they're recreating and changing and altering and adding to, and they actually believe they're literal. So yes, it's possible that at some point people actually believed it was literal, but before that, at the source, it wasn't literal. It was symbolic in order to understand ourselves in reality. So we have internal consciousness, imaginal creative, the causal realm of generation, quote, God, the generator and creator. See, that's what we are. We're little God, and we're the generators and creators of our experience as reciprocal, recursive loops, and how we all affect each other. And that's how we're aggregate co-creators of our reality, of aspects of what is, not of the totality of reality in the universe of objective reality, but we have an input and an effect on objective reality. Look at the world we've created. It wasn't here before humans. So clearly we are generators and creators from our internal causal, quote, spiritual, imaginal, and quote, we're gods because of that. So it's all symbolic. Metaphors. So the internal causal is the, quote, spiritual and the potential. The, quote, God potential, right? The, quote, God ideal. Created into, quote, God actual from the potential creative causal realm through apotheosis of self-transformation, becoming the, quote, higher self. Well, the apotheosis of self-transformation, well, that's where you recognize your power as a quote God, right? Where you're the generator and creator of experiences, and then other people generate and create experiences, and that creates the social world we live in, and then that social world, well, those experiences come in and affect us. And then we generate, based on those effects, new causal effects, and we generate out into reality, and it reciprocates, and it keeps going back and forth in a recursive loop. Cause and effect is everywhere. So the apotheosis of self-transformation, when we learn to detach from the fake world, and we go learn about ourselves in reality, and we take the journey, we get on the journey, and this is the hero's journey in the monomyth, as Joseph Campbell gets into. I'll be adding this to my understanding to help other people understand the metaphors and the power of metaphors. This is what it is. It's apotheosis of becoming a god through self-transformation. That's what alchemy is realizing how you are a generator and creator of your own experiences, and affecting other people's experiences, and how other people affect your experience, and what we generate into the world, and our experiences affect the world and other beings that aren't human either. So that's how we become the quote higher self, right? That's we're detaching from the falsity of our conditioning, and we're actually going to learn about ourselves and reality, and how we reflect reality, and reality reflects us, and we're going to get more into our authenticity of being able to create in reality as we should and ought to, which is what I've been talking about in the article, which I'll get back to soon, in terms of what we ought to do and what we should do is not what currently is, which is why we need our God power, our spirit power of the causal power and the creative power and the generative power and the creator power of the potential and the ideal from our ideas, from the mind, from the internal imaginal realm, from internal consciousness, and that's spiritual realm. As I've been explaining, it's all in my past work. It's just I haven't seen it in this light because I was still influenced by conceptions that were not fully grounded in reality. But now I've been able to reformulate things in more grounded and coherent ways. And I'll just mention this, maybe people were not aware. I've written works on cleansing the body to evolve consciousness. I'm always working on myself. So I've been working on myself, and I've managed to get rid of pleasure trap aspects. I've written about the pleasure trap. I've learned about myself and reality and things like that. That's why I focused on that as a foundational issue, and why we don't seek truth and morality. So I'm always trying to find out causal relations. I don't look at specifically, let's analyze sexual perversions or sexual attachment or whatever other pleasure attachments and alcohol and drugs. I don't do them specifically. I mention them in reference to foundational psychological causes. I'm trying always to go to the causal factors. It's where the moral foundation of recognizing the animal issue is a causal factor we need to target. So in cleansing the body to evolve consciousness, I talked about other aspects of the pleasure trap and how they prevent us from truly evolving, and we need to get rid of our attachments. One of them, there's alcohol and all this infatuation with pleasure and sexual stuff and all these other things. There's smoking weed, and I've smoked weed. I'll tell you right now, I've never said it before, since I was 14, pretty much every day, all the time. All my work I've previously done has been in smoking weed. I was always stoned, pretty much. Except when I tried to do audios, I didn't smoke because it would make my voice, smoke and dry and changes your voice a bit. So I stopped smoking last week, and this is when all of this started to make more sense. I just want to make, maybe it would have still been a progression if I wouldn't have cleansed my body of that pleasure attachment. Maybe I would still have progressed here. I think I still would have, because I was leading this way anyways. I was getting into more of understanding of the metaphor and the symbols and language. Anyways, it just happened to coincide. It was a coincidence, or it was an actual causal factor, but I can't prove either way. It's a fallacy to view as a causal relation, something that you can't really prove. So there's the appearance of a causal relation, but I just wanted to mention it. Get rid of pleasure trap. Get rid of attachment. Cleanse the body to evolve consciousness. I wrote this last year, so I'm just mentioning it as a possible corollary, a possible correspondence, a possible causal relation and validation of that ancient, time-tested concept of cleansing your body to evolve consciousness, since the body and mind are linked. Body and consciousness are linked. Where does your consciousness come from? The body! Where does the consciousness manifest through? The body! So it's all related. You want to cleanse your consciousness? Well, if you're putting crap into your body in terms of anything that's related to, that's not supposed to be there, that's not naturally there, that's not part of just eating and living, such as any substance of intoxication, which is what I view meditation as, and I view meditation as an impediment to evolving consciousness, as I've mentioned in that article, and as I've further elaborated on why meditation is a pleasure trap, and it becomes an attachment, and it prevents you from actually seeing reality through conscious awareness and conscious waking reality. And that's what true meditation is by using our mind and conscious awareness to evolve consciousness. So anyways, just a side topic, I wanted to mention that in order to give people an understanding of how we limit ourselves because of our attachments to pleasure. And I was still a part of that. So I'm just mentioning it in passing. I've removed the pleasure attachments from my life. Many, many of them. So why can I do the work I do? Why do I understand what I do? Because my time is devoted to truth and morality, to uncovering objective reality. And sure, to get here, I was influenced by, before, when I started in 2006, and you get into Alex Jones, and then David Icke, and all this reptilian crap, and you can't prove, and okay, maybe it's true or not, possibilities, whatever. I don't really care about the alien stuff. I don't care about hidden technology. I don't care about the aliens or whatever. It doesn't matter to me. Do you need any of that for morality? No, because morality is the most important thing. And that's what people don't understand. They're afraid of facing themselves because we're all living as false selves, perpetuating various forms of evil, various forms of immorality, various forms of wrong. So people are afraid of facing themselves in the mirror and facing reality as it is. We're all cowards. We're conditioned into being cowards. So we're all conditioned with beliefs and things. So originally I started off with beliefs and influences in 2006, and then other people's work and all the material I've been to, and then eventually you can get to a place where with all those possibilities you can start to refine your false beliefs and the false conceptions once you actually get into understanding grounded reality and language. But if you don't ever get into that, you'll probably stay stuck into believing whatever you want to believe, which is what a lot of New Agers do. They don't get grounded in reality. They don't learn about logic. They don't learn about how to process reality. So they don't learn about how consciousness works, really. They're stuck in their imaginal beliefs and all these fantastic things, and then that projects onto their understanding of reality, and it limits their understanding of reality. I just want to mention that. So the apotheosis, the self-transformation, becoming the higher self, the true self, the authentic self, well, that relates to understanding how we relate to reality and detaching from the falsity, and then working on ourselves to become better and evolving consciousness, and that's becoming our higher self, which is, instead of the lower self attached to our animistic, carnal, beastly, lower fleshly consciousness and the pleasure trap and other delusions that prevent us from evolving consciousness and keep us stuck in the rut, in the circular hamster wheel of life. Well, when you learn more about reality, you can learn more about yourself, and that's your authentic self, detached from your conditioning and attachment to groupthink, and you become an individual that thinks for themselves, and then you relate yourself to reality, objective reality, and your objective self, and that's the real self, the authentic self. You're examining yourself, you're thinking about yourself, you're talking to yourself, you're having a dialogue, a self-dialogue. It's very, very important. Michael Tsarion talks about that. I have a new appreciation. Before I had the beliefs that were clouding my ability to understand his information relating to the authentic real self. I viewed him as, well, he was denying the source consciousness, because I still believed in that as as the way things were, based on the correspondence I have with other information which I have now corrected fallacies in, which allowed me to seize errors in my thinking and allowed me to detach from my attachment to beliefs as being required in my other conceptions. So once you correct fallacies in one place, in some conceptions, it needs to ripple off and correct everything that you have formulated in a correspondence of a big picture, big pattern. It's a ripple effect, just like cause and effect. You correct one thing and it'll correct other things. That's why we need to correct things from the root causal factors, and it'll ripple up. You go from the base moral foundation, and then it'll correct secondary moral corruptions and third and fourth level immoral actions and wrongs and evils that we perpetuate and create from us, because we are the generators of evil in this world. We are the free will causal agents acting as natural law, natural moral law. We are natural moral law. It all comes from us. Natural moral law is not a force from somewhere else. It's not God, it's not the transcendental being as I viewed it before. It's actually us. This is what I've started to change. It's even before I stopped smoking. I'm smoking every day, and I was still going on this path. So that's why I say, even if smoking's not that big of a deal, but I've recognized already in a week, I'm able to think better and do things better. So as far as I'm concerned, I'm never going back. And I'll continue to evolve and progress at an even faster rate than I was when I was still attached to that pleasure trap. So I'll just continue. I don't remember exactly where I was, but so we had the higher self and the authentic self, and that's from the apotheosis of recognizing how you're a god, right? Because you're the generator and creator, and you can generate and recreate yourself, and you can affect reality, and other parts of reality affect us, and we affect them, and people affect us, and we're all generators and creators, and it comes from our, quote, spiritual realm, because the ideal and the potential is the spiritual, and that's God and the creator and the generator. Anyways, it's all metaphorical and symbolic. It doesn't represent actual literal things. It's not a literal higher self somewhere else, which is what Michael Tsarion has perfectly accurate. I was re-listening to his post-human world last night. After all these corrections I've been doing in the fallacies of the concepts I had accepted, and then I remembered Tsarion talking about the self as coming from the body, and he's more in line about that than all the other concepts people believe currently in regards to consciousness and natural law. His conception is more in line with objective reality than speculative belief in fantasy. So that's our true self. That's why it's human condition and human nature. Well, human nature is our true nature. It's the true self. That's our higher self. You can believe in the concept of God is the higher self and the higher will and the I awareness and the pure awareness and the pure consciousness, and that's where consciousness comes from, like a radio and a receiver. Now, you can believe in that. That's still a possibility. I can't deny it. I can't prove the non-existence of something that you can't prove. I can't prove something that isn't. So if you want to say that that is the way it is, and you want to make it an actuality, well, then you better get your ass in gear and prove it as an actuality, or else it remains a potential possibility. It doesn't make it an actuality. It makes it a possibility. And if you can't differentiate from that, then you don't know how to think yet. That's why really, really important to get back down to objective reality and grounding our understanding of concepts back into reality, doing deductive work properly in order to ground things and not staying in just speculative possibilities in order to conceive of our actual framework of understanding reality. So again, these speculative frameworks and conceptions, they can work to relate ourselves to the world, as I've been doing in my work, but it was more speculative, and it still allowed me to understand myself and the world and things like that. But now it makes even more sense. It's more cohesive. It's more integrated. It's more, it's more integrated and cohesive, and it's a better conception because it's more grounded in reality. It's less in the speculative things that can't be proven and can't be demonstrated and can't be shown. You can show it, you can demonstrate it. It's logically based through objective reality and an understanding of objective reality. Like I said, the possibilities are still there for other things, but until you can prove them, then they're not the actual. I'm going to grounded reality. I'm sticking with the actual. I'm trying to base my understanding of myself and reality from actual grounded reality so I can make it an actual truth based in facts of reality. And then I'll still have aspects of my understanding of myself and reality that is a truth, but I'm using a metaphorical, symbolic narrative and story. That's why the higher self, the true self, the higher will is God, and the will of creation and all that, as I've been talking about in previous audios that I've done last week. Well, I've radically changed because I've corrected fallacies in my understanding of interconnected frameworks and models. And that started with reevaluating the concept of, quote, natural law, as is popularly espoused by people such as Mark Passio. I've been correcting that. I've been removing fallacies, and as a result, I've been removing fallacies in my other conceptual understandings of reality and myself, and as a result, it creates a more cohesive, integrated, foundational understanding based in objective reality, rather than just in a belief of a possibility that I value and that I have a salience and judge and feel to be accurate and right. So they are right in terms of, and they do work as a framework and model conceptually in order as a symbolic metaphor, absolutely. But when you understand, when you dig into the symbolic metaphor and the symbolism and how it reflects reality, then you can understand how it even ties back more down to grounded objective reality, rather than just a symbolic metaphor that you think is the actuality. You'll see how it actually is a symbolic metaphor grounded in reality and not a literal interpretation that you previously thought was literal because it had the salience and the judgment of it resonated and it sounded good or it felt good. So we need to, anyways, it's a lot of work, self-work, and we need to get back to grounded reality. And that's what I did in my first year. In 2006 to 2007, there was so much information on Maitreya and Kunmaya and Saint Germain and Nasara and all this shit. I went back into grounded reality back then, and I learned more about logic. And then I got into, I was looking into follow who's in power, follow the money, and then you get into the bankers and Zionism and all of the political groups, the Zionist bloc, and then you have Vatican and you have the Crown and a bunch of things, and the geopolitics and the neocons and Zionism in Israel and the current geopolitical situation. So I was getting grounded in reality. And then after that, after 3 years of that, well, then I got into the history and how history is fabricated and altered chronology and how you can't verify things in history, and they're created by the scribes who are paid by the rich in order to fabricate lineages, and that's where the priests come, because they were the scribes and they were the ones who had literacy, and whoever has literacy can create stories and narratives and sell them off as literal validations to authenticate rulership and authority. Well, they're the ruler from the gods. Because closer back in history, well, you have even a few hundred years ago, the creation of the Protestant Church was as a counter Reformation to the Roman Catholic Empire and the emperor's rule over England and the king John Edward, I don't remember his name. So he created a false lineage to King David in order to authenticate his rulership from a divine authority as a god, as a ruler from God, authorized from God, which is what the Pope does. It's from God. And going back to thousands and thousands of years, that's what the Sumerians did, and they created a story narrative, and people believe it's true, and it's all conceptual beliefs. You can't prove history. No matter how much you want to try, you're going to lie to yourself. So what's important about history is the actual story and narrative and what it tells about our ability to learn from our memory and knowledge in order to not repeat the same mistakes, whether they happened or not. is not what matters. That's not ultimately what matters. So sure, if something happened, it's a causal effect relation that ripples into the future that produces where we are right now. It's all based on the previous karma of everyone else who's created cause and effect that creates our current condition. That's how karma works. The real karma is just cause and effect. It's really simple. So history can't be proven. And once you understand that, well, then you might get into not the time it was more into concrete stuff in reality, and 9/11, the geopolitical bankers, Zionism, and manipulation of government and money and all that. Once you understand history, then you're like, well, okay, well then we can't really know things from really far back. We can't even know things from 60 years ago. We can't even know things in today. Look at how reality is generated on the Boston bombing, the Paris thing, all the diseases and the measles and the H1N1 and the Ebola. Reality is generated for us. Who? Because these are the new scribes. The new way we see reality is not just in vocalization from other people that influence us through word vibration, or the symbols on paper, and the symbol imagery from vocalization of the old priest controllers and manipulators, the dark occultists and sorcerers who understand the power of mind and images and symbols to influence us and manipulate us. Well, now we have, there's not just the books after that. Well, now we have visual images that can directly send images into our mind along with the images of the word symbols. So there's two factors of images, and that influences us into create a subjective false reality, and we believe these images are real. So we believe Ebola, we believe the measles, we believe all these terrorist attacks. All of reality is fabricated for people, and people think they can actually verify history when you can't even verify what's going on in your life right now. And you think that you're going to know what happened in history based on a story narrative written by people who were few back then, who only few people were literate, fewer people were able to even write, and had the power to afford paper and writing utensils in order to get that done. And you're just going to believe the story narratives as literal aspects of history? Well, I call you a fool, because you don't understand how history was created and how history books were created in order to favor the winner, in order to validate substantiation of authority and power and rulership over others. There's books on this if you want. I can give you references. Medieval Empire of the Israelites, the 4 volumes on history, fiction or science. Very fascinating stuff. It's not provable, but it actually allows you to understand how things have been altered, and you can see it. You can see it from now, how it works even in our reality now, and you understand that this is how it's worked 50 years ago, 100 years ago, 200 years ago, 500 years ago, 1,000 years ago, and even 10,000 years ago. As long as you have people who want to rule other people, and you create a power differential, and you create some people who have less knowledge and more knowledge, and then you use that knowledge and you write about fantasies and fictional stories and narratives in order to validate your authority to rule as a god, or as divine from God, or as a son of God, or as an offspring of God, etc., etc., etc. Well, it takes that first belief in God or gods in order to be validated as you having that authority. And sure, there might have been aliens, whatever. That doesn't really matter to me. You can't prove it anyways. It's just learn from the story, learn from the narrative, learn what it's teaching us about authority and evil and slavery. That's what the Bible is. You're going to accept the literal God in that story? Well, you're a fool. Learn the story. What is it talking about? Don't follow blind authority just because it says it's a God. Learn to think for yourself. Learn morality. And sure, aspects of that God were teaching about morality. But it's a very confusing story. If you're trying to look at it in a non-contradictory way, wow, does the Bible not make sense if you're just going to take it literally. It's full of contradictions everywhere, because it's not a literal story. It's a story narrative of symbolic reference to aspects of good and evil and morality and right and wrong, and how not to make the same mistakes, which is the purpose of all moral tales. Children's books teach about moral tales. They're not real, but you learn about them in order to learn about aspects of reality in ourselves, and that's what stories and narratives are for. It's symbolic metaphor, parables, analogy. Alright, so I ranted there about 30 minutes or something. So yeah, we have the Christ consciousness, God consciousness is the, quote, spiritual, internal self-consciousness, right? Know thyself. Well, apotheosis, self-transformation. Getting to know thyself is getting to know your true self, the true nature, as opposed to the condition, which you need to detach from in order to develop self-transformation and apotheosis, to become a god. Right? This is what I'm talking about. It's all metaphorical, symbolic. Internal consciousness, mind, idea, ideal, potential, quote, spirit, quote, the imaginal realm, the causal and creative, the creative generator creator, quote, God, and quote, spiritual, because it's internal and causal as opposed to external and matter and objective reality. Well, this is subjective reality, which is where we can invent anything we want. And so you can take all these imaginations and these correlated symbolic metaphorical aspects, and then you can interpret them literal, and then it's all literal. And then you make a mistake because you think it's literal. So that's the Christ consciousness, the God consciousness. It's us. It's all, we can develop that. It's not there's a literal Christ and there's a literal God. Maybe there was, I don't know. Maybe there is, I don't know. Go ahead and prove it if you want. The burden of proof is on you to prove something. And if it can't be proven, then it's not proven. And it's not an actuality. Learn. Learn what is and what isn't. And the possibility, probable, and actual. And learn to separate your conceptions into different areas based on objective reality or non-correspondence to objective reality. So know thyself, consciousness, know how it works as a creator, generator of our experience and co-creation of aspects of reality we can alter and live in an artificial created human world. Is to know, quote, God itself, right? We know God itself, we know ourselves because we're the generators and creators. We are the creators, we are the generators, all from within consciousness, the internal, unseen, immaterial, causal realm of consciousness, that then manifests actions through the external consciousness as the body mechanisms to act in the world. That is how we are, quote, God. When you understand the power of metaphor and language. It's awesome. Go into etymology, get grounded in reality, learn logic, learn the importance of actual things that you can prove versus things that are just speculation and belief. The power of metaphor and symbols is amazing. It's amazing once you understand it. And then you can really get back down to grounded reality by seeing how you've been tricked by the influence of word magic. Want more information? Language and Reality Part 3, Occulting and Encrypting Reality Through Word Magic. And through reading what Gene Odening wrote and edited by Tony Myers on the Trivium and the Mythopoeic narrative, and my own understanding that I've developed and learning more about symbolism and language and reality and metaphor. That's what's brought me to my understanding right now and has helped me to ground myself back in reality. People think that if something comes from the conceptual realm with the conceptual aura of, quote, spirit as the, quote, unseen, quote, immaterial, quote, non-physical, and doesn't reflect objects in reality directly, then it's just, oh, it's, quote, spiritual knowledge because it's immaterial, non-physical, unseen from the spirit of my mind, and it's not representing an actual object in reality. It's not a physical, tangible, ostensible object in reality. Therefore, what I just thought of is spiritual knowledge. Oh, I'm connected to God. I'm connected to the higher self. Oh, wow, look how special I am. I'm connected to spirit. I'm connected to nature because I'm just imagining, inventing concepts in my mind out of pure fantasy, but I'm spiritual. Ooh. No, spiritual, the only significance for spiritual, apart from a conceptual, metaphorical understanding of what's unseen, immaterial, unphysical, comparative to the ratio and correspondence and proportion to what's material, seen, and physical, well, the only real meaning and true understanding of spiritual that you need is spiritual equals moral. Spirituality equals morality. Spirit is the spirit of good or the spirit of evil. That's all you need to know. That's the only important aspects of spiritual that you need to know in order to create true freedom and peace on this earth. You don't need to believe in God. You don't even need to believe the possibility of God or the probability or the actuality, and you want to invent an actuality, well, whatever. You can't prove it. So it's still a possibility, but You want to reject that completely? It doesn't matter. You can be a complete materialist, which, by the way, I'm not. But you can be completely into science and materialism. You can still find morality that way. You can still learn what is good and evil and right and wrong, although you may have an aversion because you've been conditioned into hating religion, and moral is looked at as a religious word. So there's different aspects, but you can still learn what is right and wrong. You do not need fantastic, quote, spiritual knowledge and fantasy conceptions in order to be moral. So the fantasy imagination is turned into reality, unreality into reality. Boom! Magic spells cast onto the mind. Often self-cast and self-delusional spells we put ourselves because we want them to be true. That's the infatuation with ideas. We can be infatuated with people who make us feel good, but ideas can make us feel good. I've talked about this in other audios as well. We are our own worst enemy, individually and collectively. Humans are the generators of evil on this planet. That's where evil comes from. There's no God necessary. If God exists, God doesn't generate evil, first of all. If you don't understand that, I have 6 audios on how to properly understand what good and evil is and what real balance is. Balance is about knowledge of good and evil, not balancing good and evil. You have to choose one polarity. Don't walk on the checkerboard floor of walking in the ignorance as an amoral, animalistic, lower consciousness being, unsure of what good and evil is, so you're doing them both. No, you need to know knowledge of good and evil objectively so that you can choose the good, the right, good, and true, the moral path. The moral path, which is the way, the path and the way. That's what Jesus represents, the path and the way. The truth. Jesus represents truth. Jesus represents the way. It's metaphorical and symbolic. Just like God. God represents the one, the way, the truth. Truth, love, good, right, morality, as I conceived of as transcendental being. I can still reformulate it and perfectly fits into my conceptions. It's that's all conceptually representative of truth, love, good, right, morality. So you can look at it as transcendental being, because we're supposed to transcend our limitations in our attachment to the darkness of the bullshit false world we've created and live in, and the false conditioning into the false self, so that we can transcend and become instead of the human condition, become the human nature, the nature of self-examination and thinking and authenticity in truth, in reality, by aligning our perceptions with reality, by aligning our delusional, subjective fantasy realm of a subjective reality into an actual subjective reality based on objective reality, rather than just a fantasy subjective reality of believing whatever we want. So we are our own worst enemies. Seriously, we fool ourselves all too willingly. The power of belief is amazingly powerful. Belief is dangerous. Other people have talked about this too. Belief is very dangerous. It's powerful. Imagination is great. You need imagination. You need to envision ideas and concepts and the ideal and the potential. Truth level 2, the truth, love, good, right, morality, things that can be different. And then you can actualize that. But where's that coming from? These ideas and ideals. Well, truth, love, good, right, morality, natural moral law, our understanding of natural moral law as reflected from the parallel processing with the objective reality in the universe, gets reflected into our subjective reality, where we can actually recognize the way things ought to be compared to the way things are that have evil, where we want to go towards the good. So the ideal and the potential, well, that's all generated from us, the gods, the generators and the creators. So we are the generators and creators of natural moral law. It comes from us. Morality isn't created by a rock. It's not created by the weak or strong force. It's not created by gravity. It's not created by any force in the universe that's impersonal. Morality is a personal force. Natural moral law is a personal force. This is where Mark Passio has it wrong. Because he has other beliefs and conceptions that are tied in the fallacious understanding, not based in actuality, but based in speculative possibilities, and then it permeates into other conceptual frameworks, into the bigger picture understanding of reality in ourselves, and that all attaches into conceptual frameworks of frameworks. But until you get rid of the fallacy in one part, it's gonna have the semblance of correspondence and coherence, because it's more of a free-floating belief that that corresponds to itself, and it doesn't have as many grounded aspects in reality. It can have some grounded aspects, but they can be misinterpretations. Because again, symbols, metaphor, analogy, allegory, and parables. And then you misunderstand symbols in relations to ourselves in reality, and then you take things as literal, and then it changes your way of understanding things, and then you end up thinking things that aren't really based in objective reality, and then you say, well, natural moral law is an impersonal force, and it's out there, and it's going to send you back what you produce. No. This is, I started to correct this, and I started to see that fallacy 3-4 months ago, something like that, and I've been working on correcting that fallacy and revising my model of natural moral law, which I'm getting more into now as I'm developing more corrections in other models and frameworks, removing the fallacies from them so that the whole framework is more grounded in reality, into more connected aspects of reality, the more data set points of reality, so it grounds it more in reality and makes it more integrated and more foundational. And then as you correct the other as you correct the other models and concepts and frameworks, well, then they start to reintegrate into themselves. Because when you correct one in one place, but you don't correct it in another, then you'll have contradictory. So then you're stuck in a bit of a limbo, where you've destroyed a falsity in one place, and it cascades, and then it brings doubt and insecurity, and the unknown. You have a fear and all the psychological aspects. So at a point, you're free floating, and I'm not sure. So you have to reconstruct yourself. This is why we can reconstruct ourselves over and over and over. We can reconstruct all our beliefs and our understandings, but they have to be based in objective reality. So when you correct things, and then eventually everything comes back and coalesces into an even stronger framework and model than you had before, which was more based in speculative belief, less grounded in reality. Now that you're more grounded in reality, well, now it's even more solid of a foundation and model, as opposed to before that was still valid, although there was a few parts here and there that were wrong, as I've been explaining about the current conception of, quote, natural law that people espouse. There's some areas that are wrong, and I've been demonstrating it, and anyone can see this. If you want to look at objective reality, you can see. Or you can believe in fantasy, magical, speculative belief that can't be grounded in reality, and you can't demonstrate it. You believe it to be that way. So the power of belief, we can twist words around and twist concepts, and then you can create beliefs that people want to believe in. So ideas lead to action through the creation of new things. Creative causal internal realm of consciousness, the quote spirit, is the creator, the God within. And then we also have a correlation with quantum mechanics as the unseen. And then people associate the quantum world with the spirit. And that's the all energy, and maybe it is. But it might also be just fantasy beliefs and concepts. Can you prove that is God? Well, I can correlate it in a symbolic metaphor with our conception of a prime mover and unmovable mover, the quote God, the quote spirit, the quote one, the quote all, the quote singularity and energy, and how that correlates to the source of the Big Bang and the quantum field. So you can correlate things, but it's not a proof, it's not an actuality, it's just an attempt for you to connect things and correspond things through the symbols and imagery in order to try to formulate a bigger integrated understanding. But it's okay if you can't integrate everything, because we don't know everything, and it's okay to say that you don't know. I'll let go of that note. There's a bunch of other stuff written, but it was just a quick note that I wrote yesterday, a bunch of stuff I slapped together. But it was relevant to this audio that I'm doing on this etymological article. So I'll get back to the article. So we were talking about reality level 1, what is, reality level 2 of our perceptions of the mental imaginal realm, and we can accept the imaginal realm into the actually of what is, and think that it actually is, but it is not authentic to a true way of living because it doesn't actually reflect reality. It's just coming from our imaginal realm where we create conceptions, ideas, and then we project them onto reality, even though it might not be an actuality of reality. So then I was talking about there is also the matter of what should and ought to be compared to what currently is. That is a representation of falsity and unreality manifested into reality. So truth level 1 has a lot of falsity and truth in it. It's the current condition, which is true. And then we have what ought to be, which is the potential, which is why I went into that note. So the ideal and potential is truth level 2. Truth, love, good, right, morality, natural law. Natural moral law is what we should be creating in, as opposed to what we're currently creating in, which is in opposition to that. Truth level 2. So truth level 1 contains falsity and immorality and evil, etc. It's the current condition. Reality is represented through primary substances. Substances do not automatically convey their meaning and definition to all who perceive them. There are actual and artificial appearances that can obfuscate our perception of primary and secondary substances. We need to look further than appearances and into the substance, through the unreality to the reality, shatter the false self to reach the true self, the authentic self, in greater degrees, as that reflects objective understanding in reality. So we are busy fabricating artificial things that further entrench our vision on ourselves and our material control of nature. We are ignoring the basic fundamental understandings of reality and ourselves, the substances of reality and ourselves. We are getting lost in the artificial constructs of the mind and manifesting these unrealities into reality, reinforcing the artificial secondary reality we have constructed based on the ideas and concepts we have about the reality and world we live in. This secondary reality of how great money is, government, religion, and any other concept of the mind that has manifested into an organized body of control in reality are not true. These things are not great, but we think the reality is that they are good, even though they are not. We have taken unreality as reality, untruth as truth, and built our perceptual understanding of reality upon these concepts. So since we've created unreality into reality, we've created money, government, and religion, and all these other things, and that becomes the reality as the condition that it is, and we think that that is good because it is, but we don't understand that the ideal and the potential of the good that we can create, since we are creator gods in the imaginal realm, right, as I've just explained, metaphorically and symbolically, where we don't think for ourselves, we don't develop an authentic self-examination of reality in ourselves, and we don't reflect and ponder and think properly, to contemplate. So we're not contemplating things and we're just accepting the condition. So the accepting the condition of good and evil, we're just accepting that as truth, as the way things are and the way things will continue to be, and then we accept evil as good and wrong as right and false as true. This is what the authentic self is about. Why do you think it's called the true self? The true nature? Because it's supposed to reflect the truth of how things should be, not things how they are right now. If the reality was a bunch of people were raping people all the time or murdering people, okay, that's the current condition. It doesn't mean how things should be. It doesn't reflect the true nature of things as they should be. It doesn't reflect the true self. It doesn't reflect the authentic self, the examined self, which is us, consciousness in our bodies. People can use language, but the meaning to the words are told to them. The reference to reality is told to them. Reality is told to them. They do not do the thinking for themselves to find out the original meaning of words as they were imbued with meaning from reality. All words interrelate in degrees of separation, going back to common root derivatives. We create these subjective multiverses in the imaginal realm and then manifest certain aspects into reality in various ways. We can fashion a chair, computers, and even fictional multiverse secondary experiences in novels, television, and movies. That's how powerful we are, right? We're generators and creators. We're little gods. Symbolically and metaphorically. Maybe that's where the original conception of God came from, too. We recognized how we were creators and generators, and we said, hey, where's the original generator and creator? Oh, so there's this thing outside of us that created everything, just like us. Because that's what we do. We anthropomorphize, personify, and project our understanding of ourselves onto other things through conceptions, through frameworks and models, in order to try to make sense of ourselves and reality and how things got to where they are, because that's a big part of conscious excuse me, a big part of consciousness is why are we here, how did we get here. We ask questions. Where did we come from? What's the origins? Where are we going? Well, what's the purpose of where we're going? So we're always trying to answer questions that we can't really find the answers to, but then we take them as the 100% certainty, and we know them, and that's the actuality. Even though it's just speculative, you're trying to provide answers to questions. It doesn't mean your answer is real, but you think because it's an unseen and immaterial answer, like New Agers, a lot of pseudo-spiritualists, well, it comes from your spiritual God realm of creative potential, right? The imaginal realm of the ideal and the potential. Well, potentially the ideal and the potential we should create, but it's often the potential of pure imagination, and then that becomes reality for many people, because it's, oh, that's spiritual, and it's better than the material, it's better than the objective reality. My subjective reality is better than the objective reality, because I'm a little God, and I create reality. And we all create reality, and without human observation, well, there wouldn't be reality, because that's proven in the double slit experiment. Well, actually, you're a person who doesn't think for themselves, and just like I said, reality is told to you, references of reality are told to you, words are told to you, the experiment is told to you, the interpretation is told to you. You didn't go look into it yourself. I did, and I understand how New Agers are full of shit. Pseudo-spiritualists are full of shit. Deepak Chopra is full of shit. So many people are full of shit. They don't understand how things work, and they want to interpret them in any way they want. Also, so believe that you're the God, and you're the spirit, and you create the world, because that's what the double slit experiment shows, when it doesn't even show that, because you don't even understand how to think properly, and you just believe whatever you want to believe. We can fashion chair computers and even fictional multiverse secondary experiences in novels, television, and movies. Without a grounding in substantive foundational principles, root core foundational axioms, the imaginative powers go astray and create progressive illusions that detach from reality and create an unreality to attach to and get lost within. So this is again the self-transformation, the apotheosis, the monomyth of the hero journey. It's all about this. This is what all the narratives and the stories and symbolism of the hero journey, when they do it right, it all talks about self-transformation and apotheosis, to become your own God creator, to create properly in the world. And it all has to do, what's it, all spirituality? Okay, what's real spirituality? Morality, that's right. It's learning about the self-transformation of apotheosis, to change yourself into a real God, to create your experience as a reflection of morality, the wisdom of right action, which is morality. To create in wisdom, so that you can go back into the world. So first you detach from the world, you go through a journey in the darkness, and then you emerge as a God in the world who can actually create the world the way it's supposed to be. You can actually create the world into a heaven, and everyone else needs to join in to create the heaven, because you can't do it on your own. That's the whole point of these myths and stories. The hero journey is you let go of the world and you detach, and then you learn and you self-transform and you become a quote God in apotheosis, and then you can actually create properly in the world, because you've gone through a healing, a purification, a self-transformation to become a true self in truth as a human nature, rather than the false human condition from the world that exists. But you end up going back into the world, and you have to do your work back in the world. You can't just remain in your subjective reality where you're figuring things out and reforming yourself. You have to come back in reality and work there eventually. There is a correspondence between the inner, outer, subjective, objective, universe, multiverse, and the concept of holography, as well as finding detail and clarity of definition in reality from our perceptions. So this is the infographic on particulars, universals, grouping, and symmetry order. As I've been talking about in previous audios on how to conceive of reality and the hidden realities, the 4 dimensions and the 7 dimensions, of objective macro reality and the micro reality of the quantum. The quantum world is you have the implicate order in the 7 dimensions or whatever, somewhere like that. Then you have the explicate order of the 4 dimensions, and that's grouping order is of the 4 dimensions of objective reality, and symmetry order is the implicate order of the quantum, or even before the quantum, as people currently understand it, into just the pure field and the pure energy. And that is, as explained by Bohm, this would be this is why entropy is symmetry order and syntropy is grouping order, because there's 2 types of orders. Because when you have everything broken down into non-existent, into just a field, well, the field is everywhere, equidistant, uniformly displaced everywhere. Everything is uniformly displaced everywhere. There's no grouping of any kind. There's nothing existing. This is why it's non-existence. It's entropy. It's not evolution. It's devolution. Looking at it that way, evolution is greater complexity, greater form, and to create syntropy and grouping order. And that's where we're at. We're at the pinnacle of the tip of the spear in the 4D, and in terms of the complexity of matter into organic life forms of animals. The animals are at the top of the 6 kingdoms of life, and they can express consciousness and free will. That's why they're at the top. And even within the animals, there's a lower order consciousness animals, and then there's higher order consciousness animals, and the highest order one we can see is the humans. And this is complexity from grouping order, from the original entropy, nothing, symmetry order of everything displaced and even. Well, the fields create other things, and then other things happen, and then greater complexity, and it builds up and builds up, parts into parts into parts into holes, and parts into holes, and those holes form other parts. That becomes other parts of holes, and it just builds up and builds up and builds up. That's why understanding of how quantum works and how programming works and how Legos work, I'm telling you, understand Legos and programming, and you'll understand more the reality of how the quantum micro reality creates the macro reality. It's not a perfect analogy, but it's an analogy, it's a metaphor. It'll help you to understand and relate to what is ununderstandable. No one can accurately envision and imagine the quantum world. It's unimaginable. Go listen to Richard Feynman. The guy was really big on discovering quantum mechanics and proving aspects of quantum physics. And said no one can understand, no one can imagine the quantum world. Not even him. No one. It's unimaginable. It doesn't work in reference to our reality. How can you have an electron that has a half spin and a negative half spin, but when it does one of its half spins, it's not 180 degrees, it's not 360 degrees, it's only a half spin. If you do a 360 degree, allegedly, in the electron, if you do a 360 degree spin, it's only a half spin, and then you end up from half spin to negative half. So then technically a full spin in an electron is 720 degrees, but that doesn't make sense. See, it's not relatable in reference to our reality. It's completely different. But people want to think they can relate themselves to the quantum reality, and they just invent fantasy conceptions that, because they're so lost, they don't even know how to think. That's where you have New Agers and pseudo-spiritualists and the Deepak Chopras and all the frauds and all the New Age frauds, and they make money, and they all believe and sell the same fucking bullshit. It's all feel-good conceptions, because what does it do? Well, it creates, the concept provides you with information in order to correlate a bigger understanding, a higher order understanding, a more complete understanding. Even if it's false, it's gonna be an understanding for you. It's a concept, and it integrates more of yourself, your self-image, your self-importance in the world, and where you fit into reality, your sense of reality, on how consciousness creates reality, and humans are so powerful. Look how I feel so special. I feel so good about myself. I love this idea. It infatuates me. I've been love bombed, and I love that person. They're so great. They gave me this information. I love them too, and then I'm infatuated with them. So you have the cult of ideas, and you have the cult of personality. I've talked about this in other audios and texts before. Psychology is very powerful. And this is why I have a bunch of short posts on infatuation with ideas, with the new, with novelty. That's part of people's obsession with technology. They want to go for what's new and improved in technology and the new things, but they don't want to improve themselves. They don't want to go within themselves and work on themselves. They want to create new things in the world and new technologies and novel technologies and new novel things in the world, but they don't do it on themselves. They don't remake themselves. They want to remake the world, but they don't want to remake themselves. And then we get lost in bullshit. Fantasy bullshit. And you have all this technology which just keeps us in fantasy bullshit and more distractions. That's what the new, the infatuation with the new and novel, the things that sound good, it's all psychological because it makes us feel good. Well, the technology provides stimulus, the new things. That's why in our delusion of multitasking, going from one thing to the other, our quick attention fixation changes. When we change our attention, it can provide a dopamine stimulus and make us feel good. So that's why we're attracted to new things and changing things all the time, and the cell phones and the computer stuff and the games. Because games have things that change all the time. You're always changing your thinking and your concentration, or you go from one thing to another and one conversation to another. You check thing on your phone, one thing to another. It's the new and novel are always looking for something new, something to attract us, and that's the fake high we get. And people don't even realize this. It's part of psychology and the feel-good pleasure trap. It's pleasure trap you're not even aware of. Most people aren't even aware of the pleasure trap and how it affects them and their attachments. There's so many attachments, but the infatuation with the new and the novel is another attachment. Infatuation with technology. Anyways, I forget how I even got off on this subject, this tangent. So, oh yeah, the New Agers and believing whatever they want and accepting fantasy beliefs because it makes them feel good. That's the power of belief. Belief is very, very, very powerful. Very powerful. And Mark Passio, absolutely right. The only belief you need, only one, the belief in truth. In order to find one aspect of truth, to confirm your belief that truth exists, then you know truth exists, and then you can keep finding more truth. And that's based on grounding an objective reality. You don't need any belief. So anything that's a possibility, you do not need to accept it. Sure, it's a possibility, and you can have an awareness in your mind that that might be true, it might be actual, but you don't need to accept it. The only belief you need to accept is that truth exists. And then you can find various aspects of truth as you can correlate them back to aspects of truth that you've grounded in reality and that build up your framework of understanding, because that's how knowledge is formed. It's all in stepwise progression. You're born, you have nothing. You don't even have an ego personality identity construct yet. That has to form as you integrate into reality and recognize influences and be affected by influences that develop who you are. So back to the infographic. Particulars, universals, grouping, and symmetry order. I just did an introduction. You can look at my other work for more analysis and related to other work and how it fits into... Sorry, my microphone fell. So we have trees and particulars as a symbolic metaphor and an allegory. We have the trees in the forest. And that's the particulars in the universal. So we'd have quote lower order and quote higher order. The lower order is just the trees, the particulars. So you see picture a bunch of trees. So I put a bunch of dots. That's more specific view. Individual pieces and details. So you see all the details. And that forms one circle. And that's a diversity grouping, a diversity from the grouping order of syntropy. Many relative interpositions. That's what syntropy is. It's a grouping order. Things exist. There's diversity, variability, and multiplicity. When you have one, there's just one. There's nothing else. And when you have just the one field, the one energy, the singularity, quote God, quote all, quote one, whatever, quote spirit, just because it's unseen and immaterial, that's why it's quote spirit. Well, that's where you have nothing. That's entropy. Because it's all identical. There's nothing existing. It's not identity, it's identical. And then from that you abstract. So when you have all those little points of of trees, and it's all grouping of atoms that create one tree, and then they're spaced around in the land, and you can take a subset of those trees, and then you can abstract into universals made of those particulars. So then we see the forest. So in the forest view, all those dots that are arranged neatly, that's because it appears as a row in an arrangement. But if you look at one of those dots, well, one of those dots turns into the particulars of the trees, which is many dots. So the many dots in the particular view of the trees, of each tree, but when you group them together into to look at the forest and the universal, well, then you have the many particulars grouped to form a bigger part of even the whole universal of the forest, where you see everything lined up and arranged. But if you look at one of those dots in the forest, well, it looks like 50 dots of the trees. So then all those 50 dots that make one dot in the forest, well, then you have 100 dots in the forest, and that's the trees in the particular to the forest universal, and that's the higher order, the quote higher order, the more general view, the bigger picture, because you're zooming out, right? If you zoom in, it's a more specific view of the individual pieces and details. And when you zoom out, you have the more general view, the bigger picture. So the same thing with high definition television. When you're zooming in, you'll get more details, but you'll see less of the bigger picture. So you can go to your TV and you can look in close and you can see the individual pixels that make up the forest. You can see the trees on the TV, the pixels that make up the forest of the bigger picture screen. And then when you step back your TV, well, then you see the whole picture. You see the general view, the quote higher order and the lower order. I quote them because it's just symbolic references. They're not higher or lower. There's like matter and spirit, quote spirit, quote unseen versus quote seen versus quote non-physical and quote physical, quote material and quote non-material, quote objective reality and quote subjective reality. You can look at higher and order in different ways. There's quote spirit is higher, and so the subjective realm is higher than the quote objective realm, and so quote objective realm is lower, and so therefore it's evil, because the quote higher realm of the quote spirit of the quote internal subjective realm of consciousness, well, that's higher and that's good. So reality is evil, and then we're good. So God internally, the spirit, well, that's good, and then outside is the matter, and well, that's evil. That's the world, and the world's evil. It's just symbolic metaphors and references that can be misconstrued and twisted and perverted, and that's what happen is people don't understand language and symbolism, and things get all whacked out, and people get lost in bullshit belief and fantasy. So we have the uniformity. Before is diversity, right? Variability, multiplicity, and diversity of the particulars in existence. And then when you get to the universal, it's uniformity, symmetry order, entropy, one unified conformity of relation, where everything is evenly dispersed. So now you can see visually, even though we can't make sense of the quantum world in the implicate order, this is conceptually how it's explained by David Bohm. You have grouping and symmetry, so I'm trying to visualize it. You have, relative interpositions of grouping, order, and diversity. That's entropy. And then you have uniformity, symmetry, order, entropy. One unified conformity of relation, where everything is infinitely, evenly dispersed, and everything is as an equal disposition from everything else. But when you're actually thinking of the symmetry order, in terms of the implicate order, like you can have symmetry order in our reality too. In the grouping order, you can have symmetry order. I just made the image, the forest universal image. Well, guess what? We're in grouping order of reality, but I'm creating a visual representation of symmetry. That's how symmetry works, is everything evenly spaced out on each side, left and right, top to bottom. It looks the same. It's a mirror image. So you understand where I'm getting into? Right, I made the comment about holography, how this relates to holography and holographic conceptions. It doesn't mean it's a hologram, a literal hologram. Again, we're using metaphor and symbolisms for holography. This is it. It's one unified conformity of relation when you're looking at trying to conceptualize symmetry order in terms of a corollary comparison in proportion to grouping order, and how they differ, and how one forms from the other. So we can see trees in relative position of grouping order of existence, then larger connected view of forest where it all looks the same, like the quantum symmetry non-existence. Because guess what? The quantum world doesn't exist. If you don't understand that yet, you don't understand it exists in its own realm. It doesn't exist here. The laws that apply there don't apply here. It's non-existence for us, okay? You can't exist there. That is non-existence. You go to the field level, it's entropy. You go to the symmetry order, the implicate order, it's non-existence. It's everything evenly dispersed. There's nothing there. It's all one. It's one field, one energy. It's the one all God, whatever. Again, that's it could be real or it could be anthropomorphized projection and personification of ourselves as we relate our internal realms of consciousness, quote spirit, quote God, quote creator, quote generator, etc., and we project things. Or it could be a valid correspondence. But again, you can't prove the non-existence of something, and if you want to prove the existence of something, well, you better prove it. Until then, it's a possibility, and you can't negate it. So you can envision anything you want to envision. You can imagine any fantasy you want. And okay, you can't prove it, but since it's just a fantasy, you can't disprove it either. So it never enters the realm of actual. It always stays in the realm of possible. Unless it contradicts something that is actual, then it automatically goes into the realm of impossible. And it's just a pure fantasy. It's not a fantasy of a possibility, it's just pure imagined fantasy bullshit. And a lot of people do come up with that. So you can have possibilities that might be that you can't prove or disprove, so who knows, but it's just pure speculation. So why would you accept it as the actual when it's not the actual? Because it's not actually in reality. Again, possible, probable, and actual. Learn to differentiate your conceptions. So that's the end of that infographic, and here I have my attempt to explain how holographic stuff actually works, because it's a concept in order to relate our understanding of reality and the law of correspondence, how things can correspond to each other, how things can relate. This is what analogy is for correspondence. This is what metaphors are for. You understand how everything is related in terms of metaphors and symbols and allegory, analogy. Even when we talk about correspondence and the law of correspondence and as above, so below, it's just a metaphor. It's symbolism. It's an analogy to try to correlate things and understand how things work. But it doesn't apply blindly. You can't apply laws from the quantum world to our world, which people do ignorantly. They don't understand how correspondence works. They don't understand that as above, so below in correspondence applies where it actually applies, where it's actually valid, where it can be corresponded and validated as valid. Because it actually is that way, and there's an actual correspondence, there's an actual ratio and proportion and analogy. If you're just going to invent analogies to things and say that's the way it is, well, it's not the way it is. It's just you're delusional and you just want it to be that way. So the more you define a particular sector of view, you change perspective and zoom in to focus on specifics and add more bits of data. Then you increase the definition and detail from previously being further away from that picture. For example, to walk into a forest, to the trees, and then to the leaf, etc., you're zooming in. Like you can have in the video the powers of 10 from the galaxy, universe, galaxy, solar system, planet, skin, and then cells and DNA, and then down to the atom, etc. So this is similar to holographic functionality. Right, as above, so below, things within things within things, quote, self-similarity, but it doesn't apply blindly, it only applies where it actually applies, within the certain things that it applies to. It doesn't apply, one thing corresponds to everything, that's not how it applies. So this is similar to holographic functionality, but in reverse order, where I was saying, you zoom in to the particulars, and then you can get more into things, and more into things, and more into things. So, in zooming in, for detail, we get more detail, right? You can zoom in to the forest and the tree and the leaf. You get more detail of what's in there, but you won't see the detail of the forest. So there's two aspects of detail. So while zooming out shows us the overall view of the details together. So it's a different detail. It's a detail of the bigger picture. If you put the puzzle piece right to your face, well, you're only going to see one or two puzzle pieces. You can see the details of the painting and the details in the picture, but when you can't see the actual puzzle, the big picture. But when you pull it back, Well, you can't see the individual puzzle piece and how it was painted and the strokes and everything, but you can see the overall picture. So there's a duality of detail in when we zoom in and out. So, but in standard holography, the zooming in would be upward. Instead of zooming in, you're going downward into things, into the particulars, and you're zooming out to the universals. In holography, if you understand holography and the holographic concept that we're trying to apply in correspondence, not that things are literal holograms, which people get lost and confused in. Oh, it's a hologram, it's a hologram. Maybe we live in a hologram, it's a possibility, I won't deny it, but you don't have proof for it, so stop saying it's an actual thing, fool. There's many popular people who want to say, oh, it's a fact, we live in a hologram. No, belief. It might be true, but until you can actually show it, well, let's stay in our grounded understanding of reality, and you can imagine and speculate of possibilities, and you can try to prove it, but until you do, it doesn't become an actuality, a verified actuality. So in standard holography, the zooming in would be upward toward the universal source. The universal source image that the others are reflected from. Because when you go down in holography into smaller and smaller parts, rather than the particulars having the most detail and the most visual detail, when you zoom out in a picture, that has the most detail overall, but when you zoom in to something, you have the most detail itself within it. You can look at more detail. The picture's farther away, you can see it, so you see the detail of the overall picture, but when you want to see the detail in the picture, well, you have to look closer. That's just how it works. That's just reality. But when holography, to zoom in more detail of the hologram, well, you have to go upward to the universal source image that the others are reflected from. Because when you have the reflection of the original hologram, when you cut and cut and cut and cut and cut, and it's a self-similar, but it's not a perfect representation, because every time you cut a part of the whole of the hologram, you lose affinity. I don't remember what the term is, but you lose you lose the clarity, you lose the precision of the detail. So you cut a piece, and that piece is self-similar to the larger piece, but you lose some detail. So that's why I'm saying it's the opposite of how we view particulars and universals, because the hologram, the detail is in the source, not in the parts from the source that reflect the source. So you zoom in. In order to get more detail, you have to go to the original source hologram and not to the holograms that are derived from it and reflected from it. If you go 1 million phases down, well, the original hologram might be have a different, like, million shades of red, but when you get down that low, well, then it turns into one shade of red because you can't keep the detail. It just loses clarity and precision. So having aspects of the original, the more a hologram is divided, the less clarity and precision there will be to display the mirror, that higher order that the copy hologram came from. In another aspect, the higher order is universal or actual. In terms of conceptual frameworks, where you look at in the hologram, it's the universal actual, because it's the actual source, the hologram, then you divide from it. That the lower order potential particular can choose to aspire to, towards, as higher order consciousness can. We can envision potential. This relates to when I did my conceptual understanding of what I had previously understood about ourselves and reality, in terms of the actual and the potential and the matter and the spirit, etc., which is in my spectrum of living infographic and natural law boundary conditions, etc. So I'm trying to relate it in terms of that, into relation of my previous work. So don't understand it as literal, like the universal is the actual that exists, and then the potential particulars, well, they don't exist, they're only potentials. Well, you can look at it the other way. The universal is the potential, and the particular is the actual. There's a dual aspect of looking at actual and potential, or potential and actual in terms of the proportions and ratio, correspondence to matter and quote spirit, the seen and unseen, etc. Particulars and universals, which so there's dual aspects, and that's explained in Spectrum of Living if you want more information on that. And it's in that presentation. So each image, copy, layer loses definition. That's what happens in a hologram. It loses definition, detail from previous layers. It is not a perfect copy or corresponding principles from above or below. It's not perfect correspondence. That's why it's quote self-similar. It's there's some parts that correspond and some parts that don't. But a metaphysical reconstitution that isn't a perfect match. It's not a physical mirror. The quote holographic concept is similar to that of fractals and the law of correspondence and analogy, where we see self-similarity across scales. So again, we're going from scales. We're going from a larger, and we're cutting it up into a smaller and a smaller and smaller. So there's scales. There's a self-similarity across scales. It's not a perfect similarity. It's not identical. It's there's a similarity. So again, you can think of, well, the God and the one and the all that divides and divides and divides and divides, and it creates all the universe conceptually. Or you can go from the other way, the quantum one field, and that creates energy, and then eventually forms into subatomic particles, and then more grouping and more grouping and more complexity. So that's more of a joining instead of a division. It's a joining. There's different ways of looking at how things are constructed, but it's symbolic and metaphorical. It's not literal. You know, the more literal one, the more objective one would be to think of the field and how it creates the interaction of those forces and fields can eventually create subatomic particles, and then those interactions of various component arrangement and coordinations create the atoms, and then the component and coordination and arrangement of the atoms into molecules and matter, blah 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 blah. So that's just how we can understand how things are formed. So if you want to look at it the other way in division, well, you can look at it as a holographic thing in division into the smaller parts, which are a lesser copy, a lesser detail, lesser clarity than the original. I'm just explaining concepts and how we can correspond concepts. That's all. I'm not talking about literal things in reality. The trees in the forest was an example. This is what symbols and metaphor are for. This is the power of language. We can understand things in relation to other things. It doesn't mean it's a literal thing. We're talking about symbols and metaphors. People really need to get that through their heads. And when they read things and understand things, don't just take it literally. Take it more as a metaphoric and symbolic. So various things can be related through symbolism and imagery in our minds. This is the part of the science of images. Imagery between different symbols brings us to envision correspondences that bring about more detail, right? Imagery, the symbols, various symbols, different imagery, then we envision correspondences, and then we get more detail from that. So holograms are images. Each reduction in size reduces the quality and precision of a corresponding principle applied in the same detail as before. So even though there was the detail above and then it goes below, well, you're reducing the quality and precision of the image, and any corresponding principle is also reduced, and it's because that's what self-similarity, but it's a reduction in self-similarity across the scale. Universals are reflected in varying degrees within the particulars that embody them. We can aspire towards actualizing the transcendental universals, truth, good, and right. And also about the holographic division, it doesn't even make sense that that's what, quote, God does, and divides himself and has a higher thing to a lower thing. Because then it wouldn't even work with the quantum field as the energy building up. It would be a building down. It would be a dividing down. So again, you have to reframe things as loose conceptual frameworks and how they can be inverses and sort of conceptually mean the same thing, but they're explained in inverse ways, in a dualistic, polarized way, as opposed to other concepts which are explained in one direction, you explain it in another direction. It's sort of talking about the same thing, but in different ways, in different frameworks, in different models, in different correspondences, different symbolism, different metaphors. People get locked often in one way of looking at things. So perceptions of the reality we exist in are not the whole reality. Only part of it we currently perceive. We can use many angles of perspective to join aspects of truth together. It's like having one single image in a 2D plane view, single perspective, right? It's a 2D flat thing. Then, well, that's what we do when we look at things. If we don't move and we look at something, that's 2D. It's just a flat representation in our vision. But then when we move 1 millimeter, 1 centimeter, 1 meter, well, you move around, and then you see the 3D rotational grasp from multiple points of view of the one thing you are trying to understand and grasp truth from. You're shifting your perspective, and then you see degrees of what exists, and then that's the 3D rotational grasp. Analogy and correspondence can help us see things more clearly. We can get more analogies, more symbolism, more metaphors, and it just builds up an imagery in our mind, and a conception, and a framework and model, and it can help us to understand things in relation to ourselves and in relation to the world. It doesn't mean it's actually that way. It's not a literal, but it can help us to make sense of things. That's what we're always trying to do. We're just trying to make sense of things. It doesn't mean it's the actual way it is. There is also false correspondence. It is not an automatic truth, though. When we apply analogy and correspondence in various relationships, it's not an automatic truth. Many analogous correspondences in reality seem accurate, but correspondence is not to be applied blindly. The convincing analogy may be wrong. The first reference to a process may be mimicked and seen in the other process. So you see one process, and then you see, oh, it's in the other process. This analogy is taken to validate and substantiate other claims of reference about the second process we cannot see. And then we do see and understand that we do see and understand in the first process. So you have object A, object B, you have process little a and process little b, and you see how they relate. And then you have, in A, you have a process A prime, but you don't see the B prime in the process B, but you're going to assume the B prime is there because you're falsely applying correspondence and analogy. So I'm saying analogy and correspondence apply where they actually apply, where you can actually confirm that they apply. An analogy and correspondence that you can't see, well, it can lead you to verify that that thing exists, but if you can't verify it and you can't prove it, then it's just a speculation in your mind, and you've made a false correspondence and a false analogy that you're taking as the reality of actuality. But it isn't, because you haven't proven it. It's just a speculation in your mind. It's only a possibility. The correspondence was valid in the previous analogy that was visible and understood between these two things. We are trying to apply another analogy and correspondence between the two things again, something we see and understand in one process, to another that we have uncovered this understanding, to another that we have not uncovered this understanding within it yet. If that mutual characteristic being referenced is actually there, then we have discovered another correspondence through this power of analogy. But sometimes the second process does not mirror the first in the hypothetical way we assumed it would, and then we end up accepting a truth. We end up accepting it as a truth because further in-depth verification was not done. We all get fooled by convincing rhetoric, and the power of the law of correspondence and analogy can be used against us quite easily. People can tell you correspondence is, oh, look at this, therefore that. Bullshit. Did you confirm to that? No, then it's just a speculation, it's a belief. And then people take it as reality. This is the problem. People believe whatever they want, and they get fooled by word magic and correspondences and analogies that aren't even there, that aren't proven, that might be there, but they're not proven, so don't take them as the real objective reality that actually is. So the Trivium Guide also mentions on page 63, regardless of whether we are holding the base levels, metaphysics and epistemology, or the further removed and advanced levels, individual and civil ethics, in our individual mental perspective, all will appear as a fully integrated and readily accessible whole in our worldview, the actualization of cognitive parallel processing. Art, that which is concretized, made real, or brought into existence by the arm. So what am I saying there? That's the whole thing about the artificial, the art. We concretize and made real, brought into existence by the arm of man. We can create things into reality that aren't real. Just because we think of them and that we think that they should be real. So we should have money, we should have government, we should have religion. So we create it, even though it's not what should be, but we make it happen anyway. So we create from the unreal into the real. And we create illusions through the artificial art of man, the arm of man. So it was not stated explicitly afterwards, but the link between the parallel processing and art is that we take the multiverse of our imaginal realm, where we have phantasms and images of reality we can manipulate and create new forms and objects from, and bring them into objective reality by our actions, making them real through our own hands, through the arm of man. Definitions can be enriched. Definitions can enrich ourselves. Hold on a second. Definitions can be enriched by ourselves through our mind's abstraction and phantasmic image reproduction. Dictionaries contain certain descriptions. We can hold images of a word and its descriptions to see deeper into the essence that they all share, to see behind it, above it, and into it. There are ambiguous subtleties behind the nature of the phantasm that the word it is a substitute for. In addition to what I have previously explained about etymology in another post, etymological sources describe analogies and correlations to other words, so we can create a causal chain from one concept to the other to understand how one word relates to reality in different ways. And that's what we can do with symbols and imagery, and just look at them in different ways as they relate to each other through the imagery, through the words and the symbols. All words reference other words. You cannot define one word without using other words. All language and concepts interrelate to form an understanding of reality. This may create some form of ambiguity and therefore obfuscation to a degree, but essentially the obfuscation from referencing other words creates just enough of a detached, focused, blurry haze vision to stop focusing on the trees and see the forest that connects them. I'm just explaining how I do my etymological storytelling where I connect words. They relate, and okay, you have different words that mean almost the same thing, but you can see how they relate and how they reflect an understanding of objective reality. And that's how we understand reality, through communication about it, through the symbols that reflect them. We can see how the referenced words used to describe the word we want to understand are used to enrich the understanding that the words possesses as a symbolic correspondence to a reality. Sometimes the additions to words aren't accurate and don't reflect the true source meaning of the word. That's where you have alterations of the word. You have the word occult is changed. You have the word anarchy is changed. So you have conventional meanings that are imposed upon them. So this can indicate a conventional imposition that happens naturally or as the result of social engineering. So it can happen naturally that people change their mind, but most often there's people socially engineering it, because who are the scribes, who are the writers, who had the power to write and change and influence minds, and who are the orators, and who were the science of imagery speakers? Well, these were the priests and the dark sorcerers and the dark occultists that influenced people because they were in the positions of power to influence people in society. So they manipulated the words. They created the words and changed the meaning in order to manipulate people. The etymological root of a word can show us the true meaning. Creative association of symbols as phantasmal images in the mind can lead us to a greater depth of meaning and definition of reality and universal principles that underlie it. So it's about the scribes. Recently in history, as far back as we can tell, that's the way they did manipulate us and create stories and narratives and guide us socially. Originally, maybe even before that, it was more altruistic, and then maybe originally it was in the smaller groups or the ancient civilization, whatever, 30,000 years ago. It was it was done in truth of a reflection of reality, and then that got perverted into more evil. Maybe people were better back then. I don't know. It's all possibilities. I'm just giving another alternative. Don't take it as the real thing. Just ways of explaining how words could have developed as a true reference to reality and then got changed later because they realized that an altered meaning could alter people's conceptions and provide them with a false understanding of reality, and therefore manipulate them by keeping them in a false understanding of reality. You can even do that with words as they're actually intended to mean. You can still manipulate people anyways. So universals can be artificially indoctrinated and imposed on people through the convention of culture. These are accidental universals. Recognition of these universals has one attempt to align their own individuality to the general universal that we fall under. Some universals are to be embodied, such as truth, good, etc., but not all. The social universals are mostly artificial and should not be simply copied into our identity or being. Because again, our ego personality identity construct is our being. That's who we are as a human being. That's who we're currently being. But then you have the true human being, which is, the universals of truth, love, and good, which is referred to symbolically and metaphorically as the transcendental being, because it's the bigger being of who we should be, who we're supposed to grow up into. When we take the hero's journey and get out of the lower being of conditioned bullshit, and we go through a self-transformation and apotheosis into being a god and understanding how we create our experience and generate our experience, and we can generate and create as a big being, having become a god, and we can reform our ego personality identity construct, and we can live more in the aspects of that big being of truth, good, and love, and right, and morality, etc. Memory was previously discussed in the importance of forming and processing knowledge, in the tracing of reality around us and within us. I had some notes I forgot to add, so I'll be adding those, and I have a link to the previous memory etymology. So if you don't know lessons of the past from others about morality, then you will repeat them, prevent access to past memories, and you keep people locked in a loop of the now with no access to the past. If you control the future, you control the past, and if you control the present, you control the future. Or something like that. I forget Orwell's quote, but I mentioned it in the previous audio. That's what it's about. You control now, and you're going to control the past. And if you can control the past, you can control the future. Oh yeah, I think that's what it is. Something like that. If you can control the past, you can control the future, and if you can control now, you can control the past. The future is only the now that becomes. No new future becomes. No new future comes because you keep repeating the same now, since you don't know what you already did as a mistake or success in truth and reality. The lesson isn't learned. The quote now repeats, and no real past or real future, only more of the current now. So this is the concept of the end of history. Oh, that's what I'm saying. This is the concept known as under the euphemism. This is the concept known under the euphemism of, quote, end of history. It's not the end of time and events, but the end of change, new novelty, of new development, of evolutionary expansion in consciousness, whereby everything is controlled and regulated into a perpetual cycle of stagnation. Stagnation is essentially death, entropy, so it's the, quote, end of history as nothing new happens. This is why the symbol of water is representative of our deeds and actions, because it's representative of change and time. Time is representative of change, and as humans, well, that's our actions and behaviors, because we, as creators and generators of experience, we can change things in reality. We can do new things through our actions, and that's done in time. So this is how I'm relating, particulars and universals, and the holographic concept, and syntropy and entropy, and anyways, a lot of fascinating concepts that people might not have ever heard of before. Knowledge and learning are handed down through time, through the reproduction of life that is able to pass on the past into the future and grow from that knowledge of what has already come before. That's why in my memory article I've talked about how it's important, and other consciousness beings have memory capacities. Other animals have memory capacities, not as much as humans, but they can learn from their mistakes as well. It's just we have the ability to write it down in knowledge so that it can progress into the future where it's not stuck in an individual unit of consciousness like other animals. So we can learn from our mistakes, from other people's mistakes, down the road and in the past and into the future, so that we don't have to repeat it. And that's the point of the story narratives. Whether they're real or not is not the ultimate thing that matters. It's how to learn what not to do again. Either from the fantasy of imagination, of a possibility that is wrong, that is evil, that never existed, that I'm going to describe something that never happened or may not have ever happened, but here's a story and don't ever do that. This is why, because it's bad. We don't have to ever create it because we have the imagination capacity to not create evil by knowing what good and evil is. We don't have to create evil to know evil and not do evil. You don't have to do it first to learn from your mistakes. You don't have to make the mistake to not do the mistake. We can learn from imagination too. So memory is the first phase within ourselves about what we understand in reality. After memory comes symbolic representation of reality for communication in a verbal form, then communication in written form. Communication allowed memory to transcend the limitation of being restricted to a unit of consciousness for a particular duration of time. The written form is far more effective than the oral form. The oral form is harder to build upon and share widely, because the only place to hold the knowledge is in consciousness. Extending knowledge from the inner realm to the outer realm in codified symbol allows others to obtain the information, to expound upon it, reciprocally grow, and allow the knowledge to go beyond our death. So if you don't write it down, well, it's going to stay with you and die. That's why we have to share our knowledge, and then it reciprocates and people develop upon it and share back, and then we can grow and grow and grow, and we can share knowledge and truth with each other, and we can progress into the future and not make the same mistakes, not even generate first mistakes in the first place. So I hope you enjoyed this audio. It went long because I elaborated on a lot of things, as I've done in Characters in Our Character, which I recommend people listen to. Thank you very much for listening. Thank you very much for your time and attention. Have a nice day. Take care. Peace.